Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the 36th annual Kansas Fest. Thank you for joining the celebration of the Apple II. I'd like to kick things off for us. First of all, I want to thank everyone joining us, everyone for sharing their passion for the Apple II, the unique projects, the history, the stories, the people, the software, the documentation, everything that we're going to hear about over the next couple of days, and also everything we don't hear about. Everyone here, whether or not you're on the session schedule, has a story about the Apple II. Take a moment, talk to people in our Discord channel, figure out what their story is. What motivates each of you to take a weekend out of your year to talk about the Apple II? I know I came to Kansas Fest years ago for the Apple II, but stayed for the people and the brilliant, engaging ideas that I uniquely find in this community. A few introductory slides to share, but then we'll get into the real content. Right now, we have 176 people registered. That was at least as of an hour ago. People could continue registering. And we represent a group of people from around the globe. I wonder, what is everyone's story? And why don't we have anyone from Greenland yet? But let me introduce the people who are organizing this. First, Chris, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Peter. So I'm Chris Torrance, and I've been coming to Kansas Fest since I think 2015. And I've been on the committee for about the last 4 years. And I have a retro computer YouTube channel as well as a store where you can buy all sorts of fun t-shirts and other goodies. And I'm just really happy to be here for Kansas Fest 2025. And just one note, there's still, I think, 22 hours left in Hackfest 2025. So if you suddenly think of a project, feel free to head over to the Hackfest Discord channel. There's lots of notes there about how to enter and what the rules are. So don't forget about that. And now I will hand it over to Ron.
Hey, everybody. It's Ron McAdams from Ron's Computer Videos. I am just doing my part here at the bowels of the ship this year, helping with the stream. I want to thank everybody on the committee, both currently and past members and future members, for all of their contributions for keeping this event going. My first time attending in person, I think, would have been 2022. Was that the year back after the pandemic? But I attended the two virtual K-Fests. The dream seemed so far away because I was like, I don't know, I can't take a week off work to come and do this. But I think for a lot of people, the pandemic sort of changed a lot of people's focus and priorities. And I thought, I got to get out and do some of these great things. And so watching the event online made me realize that there is a really awesome community that has came up around this event. And I went and I had an amazing time, and I went back the next year, and I went back the next year, and I'm back again this year. So thank you to everybody. And I will pass to Jay.
Hi, everybody. I am Jay Graham. I am probably the newest committee member and board member here. I actually started coming to Kansas Fest in 2013 when Woz and Randy Wigginton were there, and it was like, wow, this is going to be a great conference, with Woz showing up. So I recently retired from semi-retired from the University of Pittsburgh. I'm still teaching 2 classes there, but I retired after 40 years. And as a result, I asked Chris and others if I can be part of the committee, and I am looking forward to Kansas Fest 2025 and beyond. And it's going to be, if you looked at the schedule, I would look at the schedule because it is going to be an exciting 2 days and back to back. And with that, I'll turn it over to Martin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks all for joining and being here to share these good times about technologies past and present on the Apple II platform. I've been working with the machine since 1980 as a schoolboy. Took a very long break, and got back into the hobby in 2003 when I, for some weird reason, decided to go and buy an Apple IIe off of eBay, having just moved into a new house. Obviously it has to come before the furniture. And I think in 2005, probably, I joined the KansasFest mailing list once I discovered that the thing existed, and was a long-time lurker. Actually got myself to the event finally in 2018, and in 2023, I was invited to assist on the committee. So I'm still pretty new, but a little longer in the job than Jay. And looking forward to an exciting weekend. I think we got some terrific sessions coming up. There's stuff for people with less knowledge about the platform, as well as some extremely technical topics. So hopefully there's something for everyone.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone's time. All the volunteers are making this possible, and everyone organizing this is a volunteer. We're doing this because we love the community. We love the possibilities that KansasFest represents. I do want to put everyone on the spot, though. This is unscripted and giving everyone a heads up. I want to ask everyone here, what is one thing within reach that's related to the Apple II, and why is that taking up prime real estate on your desk? I'll also open this up to the people online. Post over in Discord, and we can copy some of those over into YouTube as well, so everyone can see.
I have a pillow. So if you don't know, at the in-person KansasFest, we usually have two different parts of the dormitory. So there's one part for the noisy people that like to stay up all night and party on the Apple II, and then another part for the people that actually like to get some sleep. I typically actually stay in the quiet section, but we thought it would be fun to just take the signs and turn them into a pillow. And shameless plug, you can actually order these on the KansasFest.org website if you want to have your own noisy, quiet pillow.
Well, for me, Peter, the reason why it takes up room on my desk is because it's the last computer I ever understood exactly how it works. And so I'm not into playing a whole lot of games and stuff. I just really like tinkering around with the internals and putting it through its paces and plugging interesting new bits of hardware into it and putting them through their paces. And nothing useful. I just like thinking about it.
Which model do you have on your desk?
It's a 2C at the moment. I never had a 2C back in the 20th century, but I've become a huge fan recently.
Well, the two things that I have, Peter, are back on the shelf there. I have my original Disc 2 that was signed by Woz and Randy Wigington when I attended in 2013. So that's in a case back there. And then over my, I guess, left shoulder here, I have my Beagle Brothers posters that are on the wall behind me, along with some Apple patent artwork. I met somebody that did patent artwork, and they took some pictures of my Apple II and my iMac and my Apple IIc, and those are my devices in the patent artwork on the wall there.
Ron, do you have something?
Yeah, I do. I reached for it. I just didn't want to speak over. But I actually, the opposite of Martin. I have some games because I loved gaming on like computer. We didn't own an Apple II until much later, and my parents got a 2GS. But still, I love games like Prince of Persia and Swashbuckler, and it's slightly too far away, or I'd get my Karateka or Karateka disc and show you. But it's so great, and it's nostalgic, and it doesn't take up a lot of space if you keep a 2C or 2C plus out all the time to test things. But I will say that the one that kind of spends the most time out, because it's the one that was at like the one from my house, was like the 2GS. So that's the one that I kind of leave out all the time to play around with.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. For me, it's an applesauce because it gives me access to the software I never had, and it gives me opportunity to share some of the software with my kids. Just over the weekend, my daughter came to me and wanted to play Sticky Bear Typing. That's what the applesauce made for me. I have a lot of posts over on Discord, including a copy of Where in North Dakota is Carmen Sandiego. I had no idea that existed. I'd love to hear the story of that.
It's probably stopping at a lot of truck stops asking for directions.
Yeah, perhaps. I don't know. Anyway, I always enjoy learning something new, things that I had no idea about. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for bearing with me as we go through something unscripted. But again, it's about the people and the connections and the stories.
Oh, and by the way, the main Discord channel for this evening is called Classic Rewind. It's you should find that at the top of the 2025 sessions list. That's where
Thanks for the reminder.
That's where the conversation is taking place tonight, primarily, unless it's on a specific topic. If we leave Dorm Lobby alone, it might cool off and dry out a bit.
Check out our schedule. It's on our website, several different formats. It's available through Google Calendar. The schedule should be up to date. I don't expect any changes, but if there are changes, we'll announce them here, and we will also update our website. Join Discord. If you're not already there, that is the place to be. All questions through presentations need to go in the presentation-specific Discord channel, and then our moderators will copy those over to YouTube and share those with the presenters. If you're posting questions over in YouTube, it will most likely get overlooked, and it certainly won't be archived. Every day, we'll send a welcome email. It should repeat the same information you have. First thing will be the daily stream link. Every day, the stream link will be different. That email also includes the Discord invitation if you haven't gotten it. So attendees will join us on YouTube live stream, questions in Discord. Presenters will have one extra step. Presenters will join us through our streaming platform called StreamYard, and presenters should have a separate private StreamYard link. If you don't, let us know. Please plan to join StreamYard about 15 minutes prior to your scheduled presentation time. You'll show up in the backstage, make sure everything's ready, and then we'll bring you onto the stream when it's time to talk. Anything I missed there? So for tonight, we have what we call Classic Rewind. It's a selection of past sessions, including several that have never before been published, to the best of my knowledge. This is an opportunity to see and relive some of that history. Some of these you've seen, some of these you haven't. Some represent the stories, some are deeply technical topics. I think we have a pretty good mix. The KansasFest Code of Conduct applies to all of our forums, YouTube chat, Discord, email. Keep in mind that we all come from around the world. We have different experiences, different expectations. Please be mindful and respectful when you're starting discussions. And if there's a mistake, that's fine. Apologize. If you have problems, reach out to our moderators. We can help you. This is meant to be a constructive environment that brings us together for one single shared purpose, really the Apple II. If you have questions, Discord's the best way to reach all of us. We're all on Discord. We're monitoring all the channels and also monitoring direct messages. If that doesn't work, you can join our email list. And you can also, there's also a form on our website at the contact URL. You can send us an anonymous message. If you have trouble, technical or otherwise, let us know. We'll step in and help. If we don't know about a problem, we cannot help. Chris already mentioned Hackfest. That channel has already seen some more messages even as we've been talking. I know for me, Hackfest always has a special place because I particularly enjoyed Hackfest the first year I came to KansasFest and discovered a tool called Macrosoft, which is a obscure macro assembler, but I enjoyed it. Chris, do you want to remind us about pins?
Yeah, so if you recall, for some of the past virtual Kansas Fest, we had like a goodie package for people, and we want to do the same thing this year. So we're planning on having a item in our store. It'll have some pins in it, along with stickers, and we're going to. The plan is to have that on the store for something like $5, but then we'll have a coupon code for all of the Kansas Fest registered attendees, so you can get $5 off, and so you only have to pay for shipping. If you'll note, in the past for the other virtual Kansas Fest, we actually offered free shipping, but just as a note, given the increases in the post office rates, just actually over the last 3 days, it wasn't economical for us to do that, so you just have to pay for postage to wherever you live.
We also have custom commissioned artwork this year from Jordan Graham. This artwork is available on t-shirts and other things in our store. So please, if you have a chance to meet her, please thank her for that work. I think there's an important message here. We're all volunteer driven. If you have something that you're passionate about, if you see a problem, you want to make something better, let us know. I'm happy to hand those reins over to someone else to improve KansasFest, to keep this going. That's really how KansasFest has continued, with people who are passionate, picking things up, moving things forward. What else is there? Chris, Ron, Jay, Martin.
I just want to say thanks to everybody who's been so welcoming and so willing to listen to feedback and willing to work together to make this year's event possible. I want to brag on the artist of this year's artwork. I think it's really good. I think it's a fun idea. And it came together really, really well and really quickly. So Jay, be sure, slip the artist an extra $20, just whatever's in your wallet is fine.
I already bought her lunch, and if she's here, she's working tonight, but if she's here tomorrow, I'll try to get her on camera for a minute or two. Let her introduce herself. I have the original artwork within arm's reach too. It's downstairs, so I was going to frame it and put it back there.
And some of the videos we have for tonight's Classic Rewind look like they were originally on VHS and then digitized and transcoded, because they were, but that's the only way we're going to get the history from 1998, for example. And we have a series of selected videos. We'll take breaks between them. Please continue the discussion in the Classic Rewind channel, and during those breaks, we'll come back on camera. We'll share some of our ideas, some of the topics that came up during the discussions on Discord. If there's anything else, I think we're ready to move on to the Classic Rewind.
Okay. Very cool. Actually, I'll ask an unscripted question. What event, what session are you looking forward to this year? Everybody has had access to the schedule for a couple of days now, hopefully, and has been able to kind of peruse and figure out what it is you like. I'd love to see what people are interested in seeing, both in the chat and anybody in here that wants to chime in with what session they've been looking forward to, even if it's your own.
Well, For me, I'm actually looking forward to John Conrad's talk on Sunday morning. So he was one of our invited speakers this year, and he has a long history with the Apple II going back about 50 years. He was originally a programmer on the Apple II and released some educational software titles, and then kind of took a long break from the Apple II, went off and became a professor of physics for many, many years, and then just came back just a couple of years ago and started programming again. And he's now creating hardware joystick controllers for the Apple II. And so he's going to tell us all about that on Sunday morning.
That's awesome.
I'm looking forward to Pitar's on tomorrow at 10:15, the Apple II GS release day dealer display, because we don't often get to see a lot of this stuff, because it's so hard to get with all of the dealer stuff. I ran into an old dealer about 2 or 3 years ago, and they sold a lot of their stuff, but they had the flag, the hooked rug, and all of that stuff. So I'm looking forward really to that one, to see some of the retro dealer display stuff.
It's really hard for me to choose. I enjoy some of the hardware. I enjoy the software presentations as well. I'm looking forward to learning more about the A2 FPGA, but I'm also really looking forward to Dan Brickland's presentation on his history, his VisiCalc, and the story of his journey through computing and how it intersected with the Apple II. I have no idea what that is, but I'm curious.
I was there. It's pretty great.
Me too. It was really cool.
Can't wait. But I only have
I
to
think
wait
it's
less than a day.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd have to say the same as you, Peter. Just the stories from the lives and the careers of the luminaries of the industry back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. I think it's just hearing those stories that are the absolute highlight of every KansasFest for me.
Oh, it's probably obvious. Although the sessions tonight are historic, all the sessions Saturday and Sunday are original, never before seen or heard. All of these will also be recorded and made available on YouTube sometime after the event. So if you miss something, it's not lost.
I'm going to say, sorry, I had to fix that. I'm going to say that I'm looking forward to Peter's presentation about packet radio, because I got a sneak peek of it the other day, and yeah, it's pretty neat. I'm looking forward to seeing the full story behind that.
They're all good. I'm excited for all of them.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
I think we're ready to kick off the first Classic Rewind. Do you know about how long it is, Ron?
I think the first session is 30 minutes or something like that. The first video is 30 minutes. I can tell you exactly how long it is, but it would probably take me longer to look it up than to just watch it. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Let me look.
And we'll be back on screen in about half an hour.
All right. Sounds good.
I would like to now introduce Mike Westerfield of Flightworks, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Mike has been to all K-Fest from the beginning, which makes 10. I said, talk about whatever you want. I don't know that much to say, except he's a programmer extraordinaire, and he has a wonderful sense of humor because he thinks I'm going to learn to program. So, Mike Westerfield.
You guys have to help me work on Cindy. I mean, she's actually thinking about entering the programming contest tonight, but she's a little too bashful to actually say so. Let me move this back. How's that? down by corporate headquarters of the BiteWorks in my living room, talking to Bruce, who was a graphic artist who was working for me at the time. And we were working on something, I don't even remember what it was, but I needed to run a couple of numbers real quick, and probably some percentages on a manual or something that we were getting ready. And my computer was over there busy doing something else, and I couldn't find my calculator, which is usually laying there on the desk beside the computer. So I turned around and opened up the credenza and pulled out my slide rule from college, whipped out the slide rule, figured out the numbers that we were trying to run. Didn't think too much about that. I mean, I don't use my slide rule very often, but it just, you know, my calculator wasn't handy, so I pulled it out and used it. Bruce looked at me and looked down at the slide rule and said, "What's that?" And he was serious. It was the first time in my whole life I ever really felt old. Well, last night, as I was trying to figure out what I was going to say today, and the great traditions of all the other people who have done this keynote, like Roger, who never knows what he's going to say until it's out of his mouth, I was sitting around talking to Andrew, because I knew kind of what I wanted to talk about, but I didn't know what kind of a slant to put on it, and I was still trying to figure out exactly how to handle this. And we were chatting, and he was asking questions, and I was telling him lies about things that have happened over the years, and he says to me, "You know, I hadn't heard a lot of that stuff. A lot of other people probably haven't either." And that's when I started to realize that not only am I old, but I'm one of the old farts. I'm one of those people that's been around for so long that I probably do know some stories you haven't heard, and if I don't, I can make some up. That's what I'm going to do today. I'm just going to give you my personal view of the personal computer, growing up with the Apple II, literally, and what it was like. So far now, I've been programming for 26 years, which is more years than some of you have been eating. And been doing it professionally for 21 years in one way or another. I actually got started back with my first memories of computers. They were still, you know, it was a priesthood. It was an elite. Computers were in these big buildings, and you had rumors of air conditioning going out and people frying eggs on the consoles. They were huge things that filled rooms. But when I was in high school, we started to hear rumors about something called the personal computer, something that would actually be in people's houses. And so we thought about that and talked about it, all of us nerds and geeks, back before those words were even there, and we were trying to figure out what that would look like. And we figured it must, you know, feel like a whole wall in somebody's home if they were going to put a computer in there. But that was pretty amazing that they could actually get the computer inside of a house and maybe only fill one whole wall with this thing. We didn't know how people were going to afford it, but that was pretty cool. When I say nerds and geeks, I really mean that. I mean, I'd never heard the phrase nerd or geek. They really hadn't been invented back then. But when I was in high school, I always wore shirts with pockets. And the reason I would wear a shirt with a pocket is because that's where I put my circular slide rule. And yeah, I pull that out and flip it around. I actually got pretty darn good on that circular slide rule, and I will have you know that you can get 3 digits of accuracy out of one. The first computer I ever had any experience with was a Wang. And today we would probably call it a really bad calculator. It was in a box about yay big, set in a room in our high school, and we had terminals to this thing. There were 4 or 5 terminals strung around the building. They had little chiclet keyboards, and it literally was a programmable calculator. And for my programming project in one of my math classes, the first programming project I ever did, without using the log function, I programmed it to do logs using an infinite series expansion. Now that took 3 cards. You have to realize that the programs on the Wang were on punch cards. Now I don't mean that the programs were read into the machine with punch cards. I mean the punch card was the program. It would go into the jaws of this machine, you would lock it shut, and little wires would stick through the holes in the card to make the contacts, and it became a ROM. So the card literally was the program. It took 3 cards, so I had to periodically open the jaws of this machine, take the card out, put the next one in, close the jaws, and press continue, and it would continue on its way computing the log of a number. And the punch cards, by the way, were real punch cards. These were not machines that you set out and typed at. This was a card that you went down to the store and bought. You laid on top of a piece of styrofoam, took a paper clip and unwound it, Paperclip has had a long history in computers. It's still being used. And then you would punch out the perforated holes in the card to get the codes into the computer. So that was my first experience with programming. It's come a little way since then. The second thing I actually programmed on was a PDP-11, and that was also still in high school. The college had a PDP machine, and they actually gave us access through a modem line to their computer, which was really generous back then. You don't. Today, it seems like everybody has access to computers. You can go down to the public library and get on one, but at that time, that was an extremely generous move of them. So we had a teletype terminal, the kind you see in all the old science fiction movies, that sat there in the hallway where we would program. And it had the yellow rolled paper that would come out printing the program as we typed. And when we wanted to list a program to save it, we would actually type in some codes that would come rolling out on paper tape. The old yellow stuff, and you would roll it up. And that, for years, I thought that was the only secure way to keep a program is on paper tape. Because if it was in the bowels of that machine over there, I never knew what was going to happen to it. But on paper tape, it was in my pocket, and it was secure. When I went to the Air Force Academy in 1973, we were issued slide rules. And that's when I got my first really good slide rule. The following year, they started issuing calculators. And the year after I graduated, they started issuing computers. So that's how quickly the personal computer revolution really got started. When I entered, calculators were something that you were just starting to see the really heady professionals buy. They would cost $300 or $400, and they would do no more than a credit card calculator does today. They had no memories, except maybe a stack with 2 or 3 entries. They would generally have a fair number of scientific functions, but that was it. I mean, that was the state of the art for personal computing when I was in high school. While I was in college, my first year, TI came out with the SR50, which was the first personal computer revolution when they really became personal and not just the thing that engineers had. And I went down and plucked down my $100 for my SR50. That was the first one I ever owned. That was an amazing machine. I mean, looking to realize how amazing that was. But you could type in numbers and actually get 10 digits of accuracy out of this thing. It actually had a memory. You could store a number. Now, that seems pretty silly to you guys sitting here with even Apple IIs on your desk, but you've got to remember that what that was replacing was my circular slide rule, and that was a real advance. While I was at the academy, I got my entire formal education in computer science. It consisted of 1 3-hour course in alcohol. So, Cindy, that is the extent of my professional training, and by golly, I want to see you at HackFest, okay? I'll help you out, we'll sit down together, and you probably take first prize, okay? I also got a free account on the computer, which back then was a really big deal also, and I was playing around with atomic numbers and mass units and trying to figure out how to build a better bomb or something. I don't know what I was doing, but I got free time on the computer, and I was pretty happy about that. Now, you've got to understand that when I went to college, I had no inkling that I was going to be working in computers. People didn't work in computers back then, not really. In fact, when I went to the Air Force Academy, they didn't have a computer science department. What they had was an aeronautical engineering department that did computer science on the side. So that also gives you a clue how quickly things have come in a very short time. So what was I going to do? I was going to be a physicist. That's what I was trained at. My degree was in physics at the Air Force Academy. When I got out and went into the Air Force, my computer just went to sleep. The rest of the talk is down in there somewhere. When I got out and went into the Air Force, I started working as a physicist. I was trained as a programmer fairly quickly because they needed people who knew physics and programming, and I was one of the lucky geeks who got to do that. The Air Force put me through a 3 or 4 month school where they did assembly language programming. Supposedly this was being taught to computer science majors, so I had to catch up a little bit to actually handle all of that. And while I was there, being trained by the Air Force to do a little bit of stuff with computers along with my physics, I started working with an IBM 36030, and that was the first thing that I ever worked with that's more or less like what a personal computer is now. Now you've heard of the IBM 360, and some of you may have even worked on one, and they were big machines that filled big rooms. The IBM 36030 wasn't. It was their little machine, and it was only about the size of one of these tables. And it stood about, 6 feet high, and it had the wonderful blinking lights on the front of the computer. I mean, the computer back then had to have lots of little blinking lights. And you actually use those. I mean, you look at those lights and you try to imagine what in the world people could do with them. So I'm going to tell you what we did with the blinking lights. If you had something like an infinite loop in your program, it's going to be in one spot, looping very, very tightly. So how do you use blinking lights for that? Well, the address bus would freeze. You could see it on the computer. The address was up there in binary in the blinking lights. And not only could you see that it was in an infinite loop, you could tell where, because you could copy down the little binary codes and then go back in later into the dump and figure out where it was infinite looping. So things like that really happen. We really use those blinking lights. The first debugger I ever heard of, in fact, to sort of regress a little bit, was at Los Alamos. Back in, I didn't see this. This is just the first debugger I ever heard of, and I thought it was kind of unique. But at Los Alamos, when they were working with one of the first digital computers ever built, they discovered that they were getting crummy radio reception. And they discovered that if they tuned their radio into a certain frequency, they could hear the computer run. And they could also hear an infinite loop. So they tuned their radio into the right frequency, set it on top of the computer, and they would be able to walk off and do things while the computer ran, and they could hear when something happened bad, and they would go back and fix it. So that was the first debugger, radio. Well, back when I was in the Air Force getting trained in assembly language, that's about the time when the real personal computer got started. The Apple II was released. This was back in 1978, 77 actually, when I was in school, but 78 is, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, the Apple II was released, the TRS-80 was released, and another computer, the first one to really come out that was actually cheap enough for real people to afford, the PET. And I started looking around in about 1978, starting to dream about actually buying one of these machines and putting it in my very own home. And I got to tell you, the odds-on early favorite was the PET. And the reason was that I still viewed a computer as a glorified calculator. And the PET had this little keyboard that most people hated. It was actually little squares of clear plastic. And they were all in a row and all vertical and all perfectly aligned. It wasn't one of these funky keyboards like we use now where all the keys are jaggy and everything. They were perfect little columns and perfect little rows. And underneath, they would actually take little cutouts and push up into the top of the clear key so you could see what the key was supposed to do. So I had visions of taking this PET, reprogramming it as my very own calculating machine, and pulling out all the little stickers on the back of the keys and putting my own function buttons in. Well, eventually my wife talked sense into me. She started looking at what I was doing and looking at the different computers, and she said I had to get an Apple II. And her reasons were, they're just the kind of reasons you would expect. They were all technical, they were all accurate, and she liked the logo. So the reason I have an Apple II today is because it had that pretty rainbow apple on the front of the computer. And I looked at it and said, okay, I'll get that one. So we sold our car. Now you've got to realize, we've been married less than a year at this point. And Patty is a saint. We sold our car, the only one we had, and we rode bicycles. I took the money we got from selling my car, and I bought an Apple II. I plunked down $1,300 for a machine with 48K of RAM. I really sprang for the big one. Normally they only came with 16K of RAM back then, but I went for everything and got 48K of RAM. We bought our first TV set, not so we could watch TV, but to sit on top of the computer as a monitor. It was a little black and white portable, 9-inch portable that we set on top of, 12-inch, that we set on top of the computer. And I bought a tape deck. That was the input-output mechanism for the first computer. I was going to write a chess program, so I went out and got an assembler because they had taught me assembly language in the Air Force. I knew what I was doing, right? So I figured, well, first I'll write an Othello program. So I go out, I buy my assembler, bring it back, plug in the first tape, read it into the machine. Now I've got an editor, so I start typing. Now it's time to actually assemble the program and run it. So I take that tape out, I put the next tape in, read that tape in, and it assembles the program and runs it. It crashes, of course. So I take that tape out, I put the first tape back in, read that one back in, now I've got my editor again. That was assembly language programming when I started. Now, people have complained over the years that Orca is slow. You don't know. I've pretty much given up on tape-based assembly language programming. But with my disk drive in hand, I could go out and buy a real assembler and get started on my Othello program to get started on my chess program. Well, that didn't work out very well either. I forget the name of that first assembler, but it was really a piece of crap. So I was lamenting about this to the guy who taught me assembly language in the Air Force. And he says, well, you know, why don't you just take a couple months this summer and, you know, while you're basically everyone else is out playing baseball and write an assembler. All right, you know, how long did this take? So 2 years later, I had finished Orca M and was selling it on the open market, trying to find a publisher for it. I didn't know that you were supposed to write little programs for little computers. I had been trained on an assembler that was written for a machine that had, you know, several hundred K. So that's what I wrote. I wrote an assembler that had a relocating linker, the whole 9 yards, whole ball of wax, and I figured that's what people would want. I didn't realize that people actually wanted to, you know, be able to assemble their program and sit there and wait for it. I mean, I envisioned going to the refrigerator and, you know, getting something or other and coming back, so I didn't worry too much about speed. I was worried about power. And in the short run, that didn't work very well because people really did want to be able to actually sit there and wait for their program to assemble. But later on, that paid off. So where are we now? Okay, so at this point in time, this was 1982. Yeah, right about then. I was getting transferred by the Air Force. I'd finished up my master's degree in physics while I was at my first assignment, working on the IBM 360s in the satellite communications squadron. The Air Force was transferring me to Albuquerque, actually to work on a PhD in physics. And just before I started my summer travels, because I took some time off that summer and we did the grand tour of the U.S. visiting relatives as I was getting transferred. Just before we started off on that trip, I sat down and really invested in a lot of money and had 10 copies of the original Orca M DOS 3.3 manual that I had written printed up on a copy machine. And it was $200 or $300. So it was a pretty expensive proposition for me there. And I bought some pin feed paper that was actually 3-part forms because the printers were so slow that I didn't want to wait for the printer to print off individual letters to all the publishers I was going to send off a letter to try to get a publisher for my assembler. And I sent out 30 letters, and I got responses, everything from, well, the people who ignored me may have been the nicest in some way. I had one guy call me up and tell me it was a rotten assembler and that they had a better one in-house, and why did I even think that I could ever sell one like that? I don't know where he is right now. He was probably the movie critic who said the Titanic was going to flop. And lo and behold, the 3rd part form ended up on the desk of a guy named David Ives, who was working at Hayden Software. Now, Hayden Software and I went back a lot further than David Ives realized at the time. When I bought my Apple II, I actually already owned the program. Before the Apple II arrived, I'd already bought Sargon. And I was waiting for that computer. Okay? So Hayden was actually the publishers of Sargon at that time. So I sent the 3rd part, one of these crinkly old things, the pink form at the bottom of the list of multi-part forms off to David Ives, more as a courtesy because I didn't think I would ever end up doing anything with Hayden. But he actually called me up, and this was sort of the start of the heady days, the really feeling like, gosh, this might be something cool. He actually invited me to come up to Boston because at the time we were visiting Patty's relatives in New Jersey, at their expense, to talk to him about actually publishing Orca M. That was really pretty cool. So I said, well, all right, you know, I'm going to come up with my wife too, and they actually paid for that too. They paid for her ticket as well. And, hey, this is pretty good stuff. We met at the aquarium, and I guess David figured since I was bringing my wife, because I figured this was a vacation, and I still didn't think Hayden was going to end up with this thing. Since I was bringing my wife, he must bring his, and he did, and we all met and went out to dinner. Years later, I found out that while David and I were sitting in the front seat being geeks, our wives were back in the back seat, and David's wife asked Patty what she really thought of all of this and whether she thought anything would ever come of it. And Patty looks at her and said, you know, if he ever makes $20 out of it, I'll be thrilled. And years later, as I was signing an extension to a 6-figure contract with Apple, David finally told me that story, which I'd never heard up until then. So we made our $20. We actually ended up signing with Hayden. I went into the office with a guy that they had from Harvard MBA school who was running the place, and I'm sorry, but I don't even remember his name anymore. And he had told David beforehand, you know, this guy's dreaming. He thinks he's going to get a 25% royalty. I want you to watch how we handle this with, you know, getting these authors in line. So we get in there and we start talking about it a little bit. And he starts talking about percentages and how 25% was kind of high. And I said, yeah, I don't know, maybe it is, but I forget the name of the company now. I said, but so-and-so's already offered me 25%. I'm talking to Apple too, so you know, whatever. But I'm going to get 25%. And I did. He finally capitulated and gave me the 25%. So I was starting to feel like I really knew what I was doing, which was a real big mistake. But we did sell the program to Hayden. David gave me the business plan, which showed these numbers that are still fiction. I mean, the numbers he showed me for what my monthly income was going to be by the end of the year were higher than it has ever been. When I had my own company, those numbers were higher than what I was making in a month with that company. So David sort of overestimated what it was going to bring into. And their poor MBA probably underestimated or overestimated things a bit too, because a few years later, as we were finishing up the ProDOS version of Orca M, getting ready for Hayden to ship that particular product, and as I was cleaning house from my rented house and moving into the first house I'd ever bought, I got a phone call, and the house was literally empty at this point. The phone hadn't actually been disconnected, but we were in there cleaning the house before we moved out, and the phone rings. And Oscar, that was his name, and Oscar was on the phone. And he says, well, basically the short story was things weren't going real well at Hayden. Hayden was about a $10 million a year company at that point, and they had this program that they had contractually committed to releasing, but they really didn't think they were going to be able to release the program. So here I am going, oh shit. At that point I had somebody working for me, I had bills to pay, things were going along okay, but here's the guy saying, well, we're not going to publish the program. On the other hand, because they were contractually obligated to do that, I got kind of a sweetheart deal. They didn't lock the rights of the original program up forever like they really could have. They gave those back. And I also talked them out of the mailing list for all the people who were registered owners of Orca M, the DOS 3.3 version. So with those things in hand, I went around looking for another publisher because the last thing in the world I wanted to be was a publisher. And I didn't find one. So we finally opened up our doors as ByteWorks in, I think, 1984. That's when Hayden actually collapsed and we started showing records of actually having sold things. And we did a mailing to the people who had bought the DOS 3.3 version of Orca M. Actually, I should back up a minute and tell you what it was like preparing that product at that time, because Hayden had done it up until then, and Hayden was a book company. They had all these typesetting machines and doing proof pages and all this kind of stuff. The first version of Orca M wasn't done that way. The first version of Orca M that we published, we went out and we bought a new printer. It was a daisy wheel printer. And we printed out the originals on this daisy wheel printer. And I put page numbers in by hand, okay? I would actually print out a list of numbers generated by a program that I'd written, cut out each individual number, and glue it on the page. That wasn't the half of it. The headers had to be different, don't you know? And the only way I could get headers that were different is I went down to the graphic arts store and I bought sheet upon sheet upon sheet of rub-off letters. And I sat in front of the TV with movies going, and I would do all of the headings for that original manual by hand with rub-off letters. I did the back cover with rub-off letters. The first time we ever went into a typesetter, I said, you know, we want to do something like this. And they looked at it and said, yeah, that's typeset. No, I did that with rub-off letters. You're kidding. So that was how we did the first manual for Orca M, is with rub-off letters. Sitting in front of the TV, which I got to be good friends with, copying discs over the years and doing rub-off letters. So anyway, we shipped this program and we got a 40% response. Geez, we must be walking on water. And that was really pretty good. And that was the start of the ByteWorks. Was that particular program. I mean, the company existed, the name existed as a writing company before that, a software engineering company. That's when the ByteWorks world became a publisher, in 1984. Back when Hayden was still doing stuff, David Ives had pulled off one of the most remarkable coups in Apple II history as far as software development tools go. He had run into a guy named Bill Minch, who had originally worked on the old 6502 and had done something called the 65C02. Bill Minch was making a fair amount of money selling these little computers to people who were putting parts in your body. That's really where the 6502 was used most frequently. People were putting them in pacemakers. They were putting them in medical machinery because they wanted to use the same processor in the machinery that they were using in the body. And they were, in fact, the 6502 for a long time was the only computer medically approved for in-body use. And Bill Minch was doing it. He did the 65C02 as a low-power version, so they could put it in there and actually make this thing work with a lot less power so it didn't generate as much heat and cause scar tissue and stuff. Well, the people that he was working with wanted a new processor, and so he was building something called the 65-816. And the reason it has an 8-bit bus, and why Bill Minch never really cared whether Apple thought it should have a 16-bit bus, was that he was building a chip for in-body use. He wanted something that was electrically simple, that would be very low power, didn't have to be real high speed, but it just needed a little more processing power than the old CO2. So that's why the 816 exists. He doesn't care about the Apple II. I mean, that was neat for him. That was a real head trip for him. But you've got to remember that the Apple II GS sold about 1 million machines. And Bill Minch has sold considerably more than 1 million 65-816s. The Apple was just a blip for him. But David Ives got hooked up with this guy and convinced him that we were the people to do the development tools. He convinced him so thoroughly that we were the people to do the development tools that he wouldn't tell Roger Wagner and Glenn Breeden what the chip was like until it was actually released. So Merlin didn't come out for the 65-816 because they didn't know what the chip was. I got a chance to define the assembly language syntax and put out the standard. And for once, I didn't let my head get to me, and I did an open tent kind of standard. There were 2 levels to it. The first level was, all right, guys, let's all get together on this, and let's all use the same symbols for long addressing, for all the different ways that you can do that. We had the greater than, or the less than already, that was in all the old 6502 assemblers. We're getting the greater than, getting the most significant byte. So we came up with the less than for the least significant byte, the vertical bar for absolute addressing and so forth. So all of that was come up with before they even got online. And Glenn, I don't know if I think if he had known that I'd done it, he probably would have come up with something different just out of spite, because I don't think he liked me very much in those years, for good reason. So we shipped a version of Orca for the 65-816 back then, and David Ives started talking to Apple. And nothing really happened at that point. That was the old Apple IIX. Do you guys remember that? That was the one Wozniak designed. It was a precursor to the Apple II GS. It was a replacement for the Apple II. It used the 65-816. And the whole intent of that machine was to sort of form a bridge between the old Apple II platform and the Macintosh platform, which was getting started at that point also. And Wozniak's idea was he was going to put something like Unix on it. It was actually designed for multitasking. And it had hooks in there for a special card that they were going to put in the machine that would be a Macintosh on the card. So you would buy this machine as an Apple II owner, and you would be able to plug a Macintosh into your Apple II and make the transition onto the Mac side, which actually makes a lot of sense. The problem was Bill Minch wasn't able to deliver the chips on time, which started a long-running feud between Bill Minch and Apple Computer about who was really at fault over what. But because his chips weren't there in quantity, they canceled the Apple IIX. And it was a couple of years later that they actually revived the whole idea of a 65-bit-based computer with a completely different engineering team that had no commitment whatsoever to the Apple IIX, and that project never went any further at all. So that's kind of the old days there. So we start working on the Apple II GS. And I went out to Apple as I started to find out that this thing was happening. They sort of invited me out there and they said, well, what can we do for you? And I said, well, you can endorse my assembler. I said, well, we don't really endorse products. If we endorse something, the way we do it is we put the Apple label on it. Well, that would work too. And so we started chatting and they started telling me about the Apple II GS, and I was pretty hyped. I mean, that was the machine that Orca M could finally come alive on. Because here I had an assembler that was doing relocatable code. Back in the days when the Apple II really didn't need relocatable code, and I was getting killed in the marketplace by Merlin, which really wasn't as capable a product in terms of what I thought an assembler should be, because it didn't do relocatable code, so it was a lot faster, and it was really what people needed at the time. So I started chatting with Apple, and what they needed was an environment that they could put multiple languages in. Well, Orca M already had that. They needed a shell. Orca M already had that. They needed a relocating product that could do relocation. Well, Orca M already did that. They needed a product that could handle linkers in multiple languages. Orca already had a linker. And actually, even though the OMF format that you use on the Apple II GS has an Apple copyright, if you go back and look at Orca M 4.0 in the appendix and look very carefully at the linker format that we were using to go between the assembler and the linker, that is OMF. We suggested that as, in our first contract for Apple, we suggested that as the actual OMF, and they adopted that standard. Extended it a lot to handle the longer numbers, but that is OMF. So you can blame me for that. As I was sitting there at the table with a group of people from Apple Computer, there was still a lot of people hanging on to the old days of, gosh, we've got to have this assembler that's going to actually print the real hex code over here to the left as we go. You know, the relocating assemblers can't do that. We've got all of this code that we've done in an assembler called EDASM because that was the Apple assembler at that time. What are we going to do about that? And it may be the only technical coup of my entire career. I pulled out a floppy disk from my briefcase that was an EDASM to Orca converter, and I slid it across the table to this guy who was really giving me all this hassle from Apple Computer, and I said, here, it's an EDASM to Orca converter. He said, well, what's this going to cost us? I said, nothing, it's free. The source code's on the disk, have fun. And he kind of collapsed. He took the wind right out of his sails, and the other people carried the day, and they decided that Orca M was going to become what was then called CPW, or the Cortland Programmers Workshop. Now there's a story behind that too. Originally they wanted to call it APW, Apple Programmers Workshop, because this was an Apple computer. Well, the reason that the original version came out as CPW is that the Macintosh programmers who were working on something called MPW looked at it and said, no, that'll get people confused. They'll think that this product is the Apple Programmers Workshop and the Macintosh is the real Apple. So they torpedoed the name. And they said, you can't call it that. You're going to have to call it the Cortland Programmers Workshop. So that's what we were coming out as. And at the last minute, somebody in the Apple II team changed the name of the computer from the Cortland to the Apple II GS, and very quickly changed from Portland Programmers Workshop to Apple Programmers Workshop and shipped the product before the NPW guys could figure out what to do. So that's why you have APW. Back in the early days, the first time I saw an Apple II GS, it looked like it was in a morgue or something. You walked into this room and you had this circuit board sitting here. And there were 3 connectors plugged into the circuit board with wires running off of these connectors, running over to these other big circuit boards that were, I don't remember if they were breadboarded, I think they were, but these were the custom chips from the Apple II GS. And they were laying out like you would disembowel this thing and just spread its guts all over the table. And up on top of a shelf was a monitor, but it worked. They were actually doing things like drawing colored boxes on the screen. And gosh, they had 16 colors instead of 6, and they could draw them all beside each other. This was really pretty cool stuff. As they started to build the Apple II GS, they knew that one of the things they were going to have pretty quick was a development environment that actually ran on the Apple II GS. So we kind of put the screws on them and said, you know, if we're writing this environment for you, we've got to get one of the first computers. Well, they wouldn't give us the first computer. I was kind of bummed about that. The first 6 computers went to Apple Computer itself. So I went to the halls of Apple Computer. The number 7 was on my desk, and number 8 was on Phil's desk. So the first 2 computers ever to leave Apple Computer went to my house, or actually my office at that point. We actually had a detective come by too. This was really kind of a kick in the pants. There were some program leaks. People were actually finding out what the Apple II GS was. And so this detective was sent out by Apple Computer to go around to all the people who actually had an Apple II GS and either scare us to death or find the culprit so they could actually prosecute this guy, I guess. I don't know what they were going to do. So this detective comes winging into my office one day and sits down. He was like, well, who has access to this building? Well, I do. You have a maid? Well, yeah, there's a maid. She comes in and cleans up. Well, how could she tell, you know, how can you prevent all the information from getting out through the maid? I was like, no, we're not doing nuclear technology here anymore, guys. This isn't the military, it's a computer. So besides, it looks like an Apple IIe, and he looks over there, and lo and behold, it did look like an Apple IIe. That's what they were putting them in back then, was Apple IIe boxes. He grumbles a little bit, he says, but it says Cortland on the front of it. Yeah, that's what they sent me, I'm sorry. Well, a few weeks later, we actually got new computers. Apple wanted all of the old computers back, and they were going to send out all new computers. And the new computers, lo and behold, had the Apple IIe label on the front of them. And inside, they were Apple II GSs. So we took a look at the new box and took a look at the old box, and I pulled the cover off of the old box and swapped the covers and sent them back to the old computer. I still have my original Cortland label for the Apple computer. One of the things that still sticks in my mind, just wandering around the halls of Apple Computer, I mean, they were God back then. I mean, and they knew it too. Boy, I tell you, they had egos bigger than mine, which took a lot of doing. But wandering around the corporate headquarters of Apple and actually having a pass to go anywhere I wanted and look at pretty much anything I wanted was really pretty heady. But of all the things I saw, all the people I met, the thing that still sticks in my mind the most is Steve Glass, who was the guy who wrote Quick Draw. Steve was the kind of person you would look at and think, okay, yeah, he's technically competent, and he was. And he's an okay guy, and he was. We got along just fine. But what really surprised me is here in these corporate halls where you think of all of these people, you know, and creating the computer revolution, here's Steve Glass wandering around barefoot. He didn't wear shoes to work. Wow, you know, this is a pretty loose culture here. So of all the things I remember from the Apple Computer corporate headquarters, that's the one that sticks in my mind the most. Steve Glass wandering around Apple Computer with no shoes. It's about this time that things, you know, this sort of the rosy glow started to wear off a little bit. We started to realize what corporate politics were all about, how things like that work. back when System 3.2 was out, I wrote the first switcher for the Apple IIgs. And I sent it to a few people trying to get some interest in it. I didn't want to maintain the thing. We were a language company, and by then I knew enough about business to realize that I could probably make more money selling it to somebody else than by putting it out myself. So I showed it to some people at Apple Computer, and I got a call from one of the techs at Apple, and he said, you know, a lot of people here at Apple really don't want to ever see this program come out. I said, well, why? He said, because an Apple II isn't supposed to do that. Oh. I mean, I had corporate enemies I didn't even know about because I wrote a switcher, and an Apple II isn't supposed to do that. The switcher is still buried somewhere in our archives. It never did get released. I don't know if they got to the other people who would have published it or whether it was just inertia or whatever, but it never did come out. Anybody's curious, I suppose I could dig it out and send you one.
Send it to me.
I warn you, it only works with System 3.2.
Send it to me. I got a System 3.2 disc somewhere.
Okay. By this time, we'd done Orca Pascal, Orca C, a bunch of courses. We were, whoops, I lost my screen here again. We were doing pretty well for ourselves, but things were starting to turn a little bit sour at the BiteWorks too, because gosh, if Wozniak had run Apple, they never would have gotten out of the garage. Let's be honest about it. Wozniak is a great engineer, but he doesn't know beans about business. Just look at his rock concerts he tried to run. Well, I was pretty good at writing software, but I didn't know beans about business either, and I made some really serious mistakes. We had some pretty dark years there in the early 90s. Basically, we had 5 people who weren't making enough money to really pay all those people and do all the stuff we should have done. I wasn't heartless enough to just fire everybody. And things gradually went downhill until finally the bottom dropped out of the Apple II market, and I didn't cut back quickly enough. So we actually had some pretty dark years there where at one point we were in debt by enough to buy a house. But along about that time, I found out that, in the computer world, old enemies become your allies in the future. And one of my roughest competitors from the early days, Roger Wagner, I finally hooked up with him. And I did Logo, which, I really didn't think Logo was going to be my white knight. But it turned out that it was, for this little program called Hyper Studio, and he paid me this pitifully small royalty that neither one of us thought was going to amount to much. In fact, the original Hyperlogo contract had a provision in it. If we didn't make at least $20,000 in royalties after a year and a half, then he would pay us the balance of $20,000 for all the work that we did. Well, we made that. In fact, we made quite a bit, and we're still going pretty strong. And although the company is a lot smaller, working out of our living room still, we're actually a very profitable little company right now, I'm happy to say. We're very much in the black, very healthy, much more healthy right now as a company than we were back in the heydays of the Apple II, and doing real well. So we've pretty much recovered from all that, and you hear me up here knocking on wood as I say that. And we're actually starting to come out with another product that I hope you'll come to the talk for tonight, called GSoft Basic. And GSoft Basic probably makes no sense on the Apple IIgs. I'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. But there are reasons for doing it that go well beyond the Apple II. But you guys get lucky. If you like BASIC, you get lucky because it made sense to bring it out on the Apple IIgs as well. One of the other things I discovered over the years is that this is hard for an engineer to learn, but one of the things that it's okay to do is selfless promotion, so that's what I'm going to do right now. You guys had to listen to me for an hour, and now to pay for that crime, you're going to actually have to get my handouts here. This is the catalog of all the stuff we have right now. Okay? There's a lot of stuff here. Most of you probably didn't know that we had all of this stuff. Sometimes I'm pretty surprised we have all this. In fact, some of this stuff has been sitting in my garage, in my closet, and my filing cabinets for so long that I'm going to give you some remarkably good deals on that. Some of them are up to 90% off. Okay? You're not going to get a deal like that anywhere else. And you've got the price for GSoft Basic here too. So be sure and come by, pick up a flyer of all the things that we still sell for the Apple II, which is probably more than any other single company as far as stuff that, you know, other than people who picked up stuff from other companies that they went broke. And buy a lot. I'm in room 410, you can buy it now. Thank you.
You can unmute yourselves, gang.
Thank you. I had never seen that before. Really enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I never did either. That was really cool. Hey, Ken.
Hey, Ken.
Hey, I've seen that before.
When you wore a younger man's clothes, right?
Yeah, I'm attending KansasFest obviously, and I heard about this classic rewind. At first, I thought, whatever they're going to show, I've seen it before, so I'll just skip it. But then I decided, everybody else is there. I don't want to miss out. So I tuned in, and what should they start playing but the keynote from my very first KansasFest? I didn't know you were going to be playing that, and you didn't know I was going to be in the audience. And Chris just texted me and said, "Hey, do you want to come on the chat and talk about that KansasFest that we just showed?" And I said, "What little I remember, sure." In fact, at the end of the video, as it was panning across the audience, there was a shot of me. I looked a little. That was my first time trying to grow a beard in that video. So for context, I was 19 years old at KansasFest 1998. I was the youngest unchaperoned attendee in attendance and would remain so for about 12 years. And that was my first time meeting everybody that I knew from Genie, CompuServe, and Delphi. But it was also my last time seeing Mike Westerfield, who gave that keynote, for another 24 years. And so for context, he was 43 years old in the video you just watched. And the next time I saw him, I was 43 years old, which felt very strange. But my first KansasFest was amazing to put all the faces and voices to the celebrities that I've been chatting with online in these plain text interfaces before we had StreamYard and Discord and Zoom and YouTube and Slack. Mike was an amazing person to meet, and the impact he had on Apple II software development cannot be understated. The software that he talked about, Orca and Merlin and everything else that he had a hand in, was just phenomenal. He mentioned his wife Patty recommended getting an Apple II because it had a colorful logo. She also ran the business side of ByteWorks and pretty much still does to this day. So she's contributed so much more than just an aesthetic for logos. The two of them were and still are a powerhouse of software development. I specifically remember toward the end of that talk, I didn't have the opportunity to rewind it just now on YouTube to make sure I heard it right, but I thought he said business is better now than it was in the heyday of the Apple II. And when I was in the and that was in 1998, and I was in the audience as a 19-year-old, I was like, wait a minute, the Apple II was discontinued 5 years ago. How can that be? And I end up Saturday night going out to dinner with him, and I was like, did I understand you correctly that somehow things are better now than they ever have been? And he's like, oh, no, absolutely not. So either he misspoke or I misheard. Again, I didn't get a chance just now to rewind it, but I think he was saying that his business, not his Apple II business, but just the ByteWorks, which went on to continue to do a variety of things. Many years later, iOS apps, for example, publishing books, etc. I think he was referring to that, saying that overall his business has been good. And
Chris, was it possible that it was just based on hoping people came by his room at the event? that 90% off is going to bring him in.
and he mentioned that he was releasing GSoft Basic that very week, and that was the week that it debuted. And we had Hackfest even back then. It was my first K-Fest, so it was my first Hackfest too. And I was like, I'm going to write an entry for Hackfest in GSoft Basic. And writing a Hackfest entry in the constraints of KansasFest is already challenging. Doing it while learning a new language is also challenging. So I had nothing to show for it, or not nothing. I didn't have a complete program at the end, but I think I came in second or third just for the chutzpah of trying to write something in a new language. I had just finished my first year as a computer science major, and I remember at one point, two interesting exchanges I remember with Mike on that Hackfest. One was I was asking him how to do something, and he said, "Have you ever heard of recursion?" And it was a sincere question, but I felt so condescended to because I had just finished a year of computer science studies, and I was like, "Yes, Mike, I've heard of recursion." And he's like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't know." And but also there was something else that I was trying to do, and I showed it to him. I was like, "Mike, why can't like I'm looking at the code. I know this is new to me, but I feel like it should work. Why isn't it working?" And he sat there for about a minute and looked at it, and he's like, "That's a bug." And I said, in my code? He said, "No, in the language." And so like he went to his room and came back half an hour later with a floppy disk and said, "Here's GSoft Basic version 1.0.1." And I installed it and it worked. It was amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, at the time I was a freelance writer for a small newspaper in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, and I went home and I wrote a big feature story about my first KansasFest. This was before I was writing for JuiceGS. And I said, like, this is like going to a convention, telling Bill Gates you found a bug in Windows and having him give you a new version of Windows. You know, like that just wouldn't happen. But in the Apple II community, where everything is small and intimate and collaborative, these things do happen. And it was just a phenomenal experience to have that at my first KansasFest, where these people who I saw as celebrities are just regular folks putting code out and working with you to get it working right.
Ken, can I ask you a question? It looked like when they were panning over the audience, and I need to go back and look at it again, but it looked like there were several people that I recognized, including possibly Margaret Anderson. Do you remember anyone who was there that you kept in touch with over the years, other than obviously Mike, but anybody else that you can recall?
Yeah, many people. So I saw in the YouTube chat actually for the live stream was Eric Shepard. He was in attendance, and he proved to be a keynote speaker a couple of times in the ensuing years. In fact, I'll be having dinner with him next week. So that is definitely somebody I've kept in touch with very closely. Margaret Anderson was in the audience, as was Jim O'Reilly. Cindy Adams was the MC who introduced Mike Westerfield, and I've kept in touch with her. And last time I saw her was 2.5 years ago. I was driving from San Diego to Boston, and I passed through Phoenix, where she lives, and I got dinner with her and her husband, Mike. I definitely heard Ryan Suinaga's voice. He has a very distinctive laugh, and it was great to hear it again on that video tonight. He passed away back in 2011, but I kept in frequent touch with him up until then. Greg Nelson was in the audience. He's still a KansasFest regular. I believe he's attended every single one to some degree, and he used to show up every year with his VHS big cassette recorder and record every session before there was live streaming or anything. Yeah, there were a lot of people who showed up that year and have continued to show up. I saw Carl Knobloch in the front row sitting down in the audience. He hasn't been to KansasFest for a while, but he used to run the Pike Up and Drop Off service, coordinating shuttle rides for people to get from the airport to Avila, where that event was held back then, and then Rockhurst in the later years. So yeah, I would say I've kept in touch with quite a few people, either in person or via text message, or sometimes just saying, "Thanks for renewing your JuiceGS subscription. Glad you're still around."
Cool. And then if I can ask one more question, just 1998 compared to let's say 2024, which was the most recent in-person, differences or similarities between the two events, things that have either changed or remain the same that you can think of?
Yeah, well, tangential to that, I want to shout out a comment in Discord from Jonathan FS. He said, Mike's talk was filmed in 1998, and he was talking about things that happened in the 15 to 20 years prior. To me, computing feels like it changed more from 1979 to 1998 than from 2006 to 2025. Yeah. You know, those are two different spans of 20 years or so. And I absolutely agree with them. I feel like computing in general, we certainly have like faster internet. Netflix doesn't come in the mail anymore, and now we have AI. But I feel like just like the way you interact with computers has changed so much in the 80s compared to in the last few years. The Apple II, of course, has also grown in that time, but not in a way that you don't recognize it anymore. So there's still a lot that's familiar about the Apple II. I think your question was specifically about KansasFest, though.
Sure.
So I would say a lot of it is the same. KansasFest, that I've been to KansasFest at 3 different physical venues: Avila, Rockhurst, and UIS in Illinois. They each had their own character. Just the way the spaces are laid out, the way you would interact, and which facilitated interactions with people. Like Avila would have tunnels that you could go down through to get to the cafeteria, so you wouldn't have to go outside in the sun or in the rain. We were still using dial-up modems at Rockhurst or at Avila, and in fact, some people may have noticed that old school elevators, they would have a phone jack in them. Then that's where you put the emergency phone, and you could just plug in a modem into the elevator. And so I remember there was this, I think it was Mike Westerfield wrote to Juice GS a few years ago in a letter to the editor. And he said like how he showed up to his first KansasFest and he wasn't sure he was in the right place. And he pushed the button for the elevator and the doors open. And there are like 3 guys sitting in the elevator with a laptop connected to the modem, and they're just riding the floors up and down and reporting on what they see live at KansasFest in the text chat room every time the doors open. And Mike was like, "Yep, I'm in the right space."
I will say 2024 in terms of proximity to cornfields.
It's true.
Yeah.
We've definitely improved in that respect.
Yes.
But every year KansasFest is held. When it is held in person at a university, people stay in the dorms. They eat at the cafeteria. So the overall vibe of the event in that sense has remained remarkably similar, and that's one of the reasons why I've been to KansasFest every year since 1998. It's not just because, first and foremost, I love the community and the people, and secondarily because I love the computer, but also because the experience, like, I know what I'm going to get, and I know it's going to be awesome. And certainly there are some bumps and hurdles and obstacles along the way, but in general, like, what's the quote? The long arm of the galaxy or the universe bends towards justice. Like the long arm of KansasFest bends toward the Apple II, and there may be some hiccups here and there, but the overall vibe is pretty consistent.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for just jumping on here totally unexpectedly and answering some questions. So.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for asking questions that I could answer. Because KansasFest 1998 was a long time ago, and I've said this before, but one of the reasons I went in '98 is because Ryan Suinaga posted online and said the Apple II was canceled 5 years ago. A conference about the Apple II is not going to last forever. And there was this constant sense that like every year when we left KansasFest, we're like, this might have been the last one. Like something like this can't last forever. And realistically, nothing lasts forever. But the fact that we were so wrong is wonderful. I'm still glad I had that sense of impending doom, because I might not have ever gone at all. I would have just kept saying, oh, next year, clearly this event is not dying. It'll be there when I'm ready for it. But then I never would have gotten hooked. And when I left that first KansasFest in 1998, after seeing that keynote that we all just saw, I knew that I was going to come back forever.
Awesome.
Cool. Well,
Yeah, I really appreciate those stories. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm looking forward to seeing what stories come out of this year's KansasFest. Somebody very kindly put in Discord that all the products Mike sells, or that Mike was talking about in that video, are still available, which is great. he's still a member of the community. He still makes those things available. So just drop in the Classic Rewind channel to find that link. And I also, as soon as I saw his name pop up on the stream tonight, I immediately sent him a message. I was like, you will never guess who the keynote speaker for this year's Kansas Fest is, Mike. So hopefully he enjoyed that as well. And I hope everybody else enjoys this year's Kansas Fest. Thanks for having me.
Ken, I don't want to reveal anything that I shouldn't tell, but we have K-Fest planned all the way up to the year before the heat death of the universe.
Excellent.
That last year, there's just too much going on. Sorry, it's so much packing. I got to do like change of address stuff. So it's, we're going to take that year off, but then we'll just pick it up. We'll pick it up after the second Big Bang.
So what you're saying is that everybody needs to show up to that Kansas Fest with their Apple II heat sinks.
Yes. I mean, Zarquan's going to be there. It's going to be awesome.
Love it. Count me in. All right. Thanks, all.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Ken. Well, it's a good thing I have a system saver on my desk. I'm ready for that. I think it works. But yeah, really appreciate hearing from Ken. I really appreciate the firsthand stories of what it was like to be there, because most of us weren't.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
What else do we have in store?
Well, our next thing up for videos is actually an advertisement.
Collecting floppy disks, old computers, sometimes even repairing them so they work. Retrocomputing. It's a condition that affects a surprising number of people in the world. Those typically impacted are males ages 40 and up, but women can also be affected. Even children have been known to involve themselves in this hobby. Sure, you can use search engines and watch pre-recorded videos, but most with this condition feel the need for something more. Introducing K-Festa. K-Festa is for those who love old computers but have difficulty interacting with others who have the same interest. In clinical studies, patients taking K-Festa demonstrated an increased willingness to talk about old tech with complete strangers, developed an enthusiasm for staying in college dormitories and eating cafeteria food, and in some cases resulted in a desire to learn new skills such as assembling a hardware kit or writing programs in a new language. K-Festa is not for everyone. Some patients taking K-Festa became excessively exuberant, interfering with willingness to sleep, increasing a desire to collect and even hoard old hardware and software, and in rare cases they even leaned over on one leg to pick up a bag in their teeth. Increased consumption of donuts and pizza has also been reported with patients who took K-Festa. This medication can take effect in as little as 2 weeks. Do not use if you are allergic to K-Festa or any of its ingredients. Serious allergic reactions can occur. Notify your doctor if you have a parasitic infection or if your middle name starts with the letter G. Stop taking K-Festa immediately if you find yourself attracted to Atari or Commodore computers, as in some cases that side effect could not be cured. K-Festa helps reinvigorate weakened brains, flabby programming muscles, makes your mind sharper, and promotes clearer thinking. Some studies show that K-Festa can also result in weight loss, reduction of wrinkles, and may stimulate hair growth. People are surprising themselves that they can do more with once weekly K-Festa. Ask your doctor if K-Festa is right for you. Also, consider use of K-Festa VR, a new version for the era of social distancing. University studies have conclusively proven that regular use of K-Festa resulted in increased profits for Trizonka laboratories. K-Festa, it's time to break out of your shell.
I'll tell you, big pharma in everything these days.
Yeah, I'm seriously worried about some of those side effects for myself.
I think it mostly affects my pocketbook.
Yes, and I realize that many of these products are they're from hobbyists. They'll be on the market for a month, a few weeks. When they're out of stock, they never come back again. I remember my first Kansas Fest where someone was trying to sell me, I draw a blank on what it was, but an expansion card. I figured that's expensive, and then I never saw it again. I can't get it.
Yeah.
So yes, there's a deep impact in the pocketbook.
Oh, yeah. I think part of the issue on that is there's a lot of really cool stuff that people have made over the years that you end up having supply issues, or there'll be that everything is based around this one specific FPGA or something like that, and then that item goes end of life and people are just exhausted. They've got other things going on. They never update the design, and then you kind of get stuck where it's like, but it's an opportunity for other people to pick up and make similar things, and it's a big hobby. I love people, all the fun stuff people have made.
Well, it's funny when I teach a computer history class at Pitt, so I take an Apple II in, and it's amazing, the amount of new hardware for it, hardware that was designed after, 10 years, 15 years after it end of life. And, and you show that to the young students that are in the class today, and it's like, they're still making hardware for this thing. And I'm like, yep, 50 some years after, after the Apple II, they're still making hardware for it.
It's funny that we've seen multiple generations of add-on hardware where, I remember, I don't know, I think the CFFA came out around like 2010 or something like that. And that was 15 years ago, guys. And so there's been a whole new generation of like new storage devices. Although I got to say my 3000 is still a very favorite piece of add-on.
Yep. Hey, one quick note about that audio ad. So if you didn't recognize the voice, that was actually Stephen Wyrick, who was on the KansasFest committee for a long time. He was also a longtime attendee, and he was actually a doctor, or he is a doctor in real life. So hence the kind of medical connection. But he also did a lot of the parody videos that we've seen over the years.
Oh, they are so cool.
Which are awesome. And then I just had to reach around and grab. He's the one who wrote Sophistication and Simplicity, which is a fantastic book about the Apple II. And speaking of Ken Gagne, that book by Stephen is actually available on Ken's juice.gs store.
Very cool.
I think Chris, Steve was responsible for a wonderful history website, which was was the precursor of the book itself, and it's at apple2history.org, if I recall correctly.
Yep.
What's next in our lineup?
What's next is a very interesting video all about, I think it's about, it's either Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer. I can't remember which one. It just, the video file said Mark Twain. I don't know.
A bit off topic, though, don't you think?
I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Never the twain shall meet.
Roll it.
Hi, everyone. I think I'm a little disappointed. I was expecting many more people, and we're going to have I guess you could say a very special meeting today, because you're all going to be treated to seeing something that doesn't really officially exist. Before we start, Jen, how do I start the tape recorder? Just press
New technology, people. You push.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. I want to start out by saying that over the years, there have been the Apple II, the II Plus, the IIe, the IIc, and the IIGS. However, those are only the computers that we have been able to purchase. Throughout the years, Apple has produced many different prototypes. What we have here isn't the only one. Back in 1981, around the time that the Apple II Plus was the big seller, Apple built a prototype called the Super 2 that eventually evolved into the IIe. However, when you look at it, you see it's quite different. And when you look at the motherboard, you wonder, what kind of plans do they really have for this? For all Apple IIs, usually the power supply sits here. Here's a memory expansion port. Might this have been a portable? We don't know. You know, I mean, how could, we don't know. To leave it at that. Obviously, this machine was never released, and this machine was never released. This here is, as you all know, what is called codenamed Mark Twain computer. It's a, I guess you could say, the last Apple IIgs ever built. Unfortunately, it was never released. And what I want to do is in a sense, take you through my personal odyssey of this machine. After I've done talking, I have a feeling some of you are going to want to see the innards. And so for those who might be more technically inclined, we're going to take it apart so you can see everything in there. Okay, back, my involvement with this machine. As people who subscribe to my newsletter know, back in, and actually members of the group know, it has a lot to do with Gravenstein. Back in 1991, I was writing for Insider Magazine, rest in peace. And around January that year, my editor called me and he said, hey Joe, you know, why don't we do an article on where to go for support? How do people get help? And I've been writing articles about telecommunications, using online networks, and it seemed that, you know, that only a small percentage of computer users, not just Apple II owners, but just a small percentage of computer users, maybe 15, 20, no more than 25% own modems. For those of you who do, you know, you can get almost instant help. The other area that it was decided that I'd talk about and cover would be Apple II user groups. And so I thought, well, how can I write about user groups if I don't go visit a user group? So I drove up to Gravenstein, and I have to tell you, I was really impressed with what I saw. That was back in, I guess you could say, the glory days when there were 60, 70 people at a meeting, or then the then president was selling hard drives for unbelievable pricing for that period of time. You know, I guess, you know, only $500 for a 40 meg hard drive. Actually, I don't remember the pricing, but it was much higher than it is now. I was very impressed. I joined the club that day, ended up writing my article and featuring Gravenstein in it, in case anyone remembers. It was a sidebar talking about the club and how it met the needs of people to get help. And that was the same year that the yearly Apple User Group Connection sponsored a show or a convention here in Berkeley. I contacted the guy who was putting it on and said, so what do you have for the Apple II? And he said, nothing. And I said, well, is that Apple II user groups are half of the user groups? And he said, if you want to set it up, go ahead, be my guest. So I contacted a guy who had been, in a sense, I guess you could say, he was a programmer who rose up through the ranks and got hired by Apple, Tim Swihart. Longtime members remember that in, I guess it was early 1992, we had a sneak peek of System 6, and he was the one that led the Apple contingent. Well, he was a longtime Apple II supporter, programmer, and since he was working for Apple, I contacted him and said, Tim, why don't you come up and give a talk? And that was right around the time that HyperCard had been released, System 5.04, and we just left it really loose. You know, I thought he was going to come up, a couple programmers were going to come up and talk about recent Apple II products. I was wrong. The day of the convention, all of the bigwigs in the then Apple II division, which, to tell you the truth, I can't remember what it was called because they kept changing the name. And there were people like Jane Lee, John Santoro, Rob Barnes, people that I know he's met at KansasFest. I've met him at KansasFest. They didn't want to talk about System 5.04. They didn't want to talk about HyperCard. They wanted to talk about this. Remember, at the time, Apple had a policy where they refused to talk about unreleased products. They had a standard line. You know, you'd call them up or, you know, and ask them a question, and the standard line was, we're not allowed to discuss products that may or may not be released. So it was kind of a shock that they were wanting to talk about this computer that was imminently going to be released. This computer, to put things into perspective, in the early 1990s, Apple realized that, well, maybe they didn't realize, but they were, quote unquote, losing market share. Their computers were more expensive. The year before, late 1990, they released the first of what they called their low-cost Macintoshes. They came in at $999, so they could say under $1,000. And these were basically complete systems. And the fact that they had a disk drive built in, they had a hard drive built in, they had a monitor. It was basically, you could buy it, take it home, plug it in, and it was ready to use. The Apple II division obviously had, you know, sort of fallen out of favor by this point in the Apple II hierarchy, but it was still active. They still had, you know, a number of engineers working for them, and so this machine was being developed. Now, no one at Apple is talking about it. One person that I contacted simply said, it doesn't exist. And I wanted to say, but I have one, of course it exists. And so no one at Apple's really talking about it. I cannot say anything definitive from Apple's point of view, except what I was told that day in mid-1991 at the user group convention. This machine was designed in some ways to be the low-cost GS, and the fact that you were going to be able to purchase it, take it home, plug it in, and it was going to start up, and it was going to have, you know, it has a hard drive built in, it has a 3.5-inch disc built in, and it came with, or it would have come with system software so it would run, and it was going to come with two products that were Apple's. HyperCard GS and AppleWorks GS. When you think of, you know, I mean, we all have our love-hate relationship with AppleWorks GS, but considering it's 6 programs in one, and a hypermedia program, what else do you need? You know, that's she's heckling me, I knew it. Bye. So really, what else did you need? Well, considering there are 10,000 commercial programs for the Apple II, I mean, there's a lot else you could have. But when you think about schools, well, we needed a school, or we did, and we saw that the machines were, shall we say, underutilized. The real power of the GS was never really used, at least at Grant Street School, and I imagine most schools. So this machine, the intention was to sell it to educators. At the time, they had promotional material and pointed out what was called the educational bundle, which was in essence a ROM 3 computer that had 1 megabyte of RAM, or a little more than 1 megabyte. It had an external 40 megabyte hard drive. It came with, you know, obviously a SCSI card connected to the computer. Came with system software. Cable HyperCard GS, and AppleWorks GS. It was stressed to us at that time, this Mark Twain computer was not new technology. It was stressed to us that in essence, it was a dressed up ROM3 with everything included, that it was the educational bundle. What's remarkable about the machine is not so much in essence, what the user would see. Because, take a typical teacher who had a ROM, this stripped down ROM3 with the 1 megabyte of RAM and a 40 megabyte hard drive, which I guess at that time was not considered massive, but it was, it was certainly adequate. It was a great machine. This machine was meant to replace it. That day, they went around the room and asked us, well, do you have a transport? Yes. Do you have a 100 megabyte hard drive or bigger? Yes. Do you have 4 megs of RAM or more than this? And I can still remember Jane Lee saying, you people don't get it. You would not want to purchase this machine. You're the power users. You're the user group presidents. You have, souped up GSs. This is not a souped up GS. It is simply a box that has everything you need in one. And they went around and asked us, so what do you think something like this would be retailed for? And it was in a way, it was strange. It was like a guessing game. And in essence, I believe at the time what they were trying to do was gauge the reaction by saying, how much would you pay for this machine? And when someone said, well, $9.99 seems to be, that's what you're selling the low-cost Mac. It was as if, bingo, that's the magic number. Well, I've always understood that at Apple, the development process, the very last thing that happens is setting the price. And some of the machines, like if you've been, reading magazines about Apple products, you see pictures, like, if you read Macworld, you'll see a picture of a motherboard of a machine that'll come out, 6 months from now. And they'll tell you everything, how fast it is, what its capabilities are. They'll tell you everything except the price, because that's not set. With the computer industry, with prices dropping, you can't set a price, months in advance. The fact that that the price was the primary concern on their mind leads me to believe that things were set. They told us that they were ready to turn over the assembly line, and they were ready to throw the switch to start manufacturing these. At the time, I was working at Insider, so obviously I had, they had an 800 number I could call up and get any information I wanted. So a couple of weeks later, I found out that this same group had flown out to Peterborough, New Hampshire to show the staff of Insider the computer, which is something that they didn't show to us. They showed us pictures, they talked about it. But they had it, the Insider, they took pictures, they got the tour. They also had to sign non-disclosure agreements, which, I guess they broke by talking to me, but considering I was on staff, it didn't matter. They had, of course, planned to, as they'd done, when GS came out, they had, a picture of it on the front cover. They, of course, had planned to have lots of hoopla surrounding the release of this GS. Coincidentally, around this time, Steve Disbrow published GS Plus magazine. He got a letter from Apple saying, we want you to change the name of your publication. He went so far as to put I can't call it a survey, but asking readers, well, we've been asked to change our name. What should it be changed to? Well, I asked Steve years later. I said, Steve, tell me what month that was. Mid 1991. So, possibly, this machine, as you notice, it doesn't have a name on the front. It's possible that this would have been called the GS Plus. Of course, we don't know. After Insider's non-disclosure agreement ran out, they had to sign a thing saying, we'll keep quiet for, I think it was 90 days. My then cohort, Paul Stack, posted a message on America Online. He said something like, I've seen the Mark Twain computer. I have seen the ROM 4. I can now talk about it. He described it in detail. In essence, a built-in hard drive, 40 meg hard drive, a built-in 3.5-inch disk drive, 2 megabytes of RAM on the motherboard, a built-in high-speed SCSI card, a built-in SuperDrive controller card, built-in stereo output, built-in sound digitizing hardware, and he ended his message saying, and they canceled it. Well, somehow at that time, I kind of remember there was a bit of a furor among the Apple II community, and somehow this thing that no one had ever seen a picture of it, took on a whole new, I don't know how to describe it, but it was like, in a way, I think a lot of Apple II users felt, well, this is the final kick in the rear from Apple. We've been teased with, John Scully saying we're going to support the Apple II well into the 1990s. Apple was still producing products for it. I mean, we were still, a good year away from system. Well, I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly what month System 6 was released. I think it was January 92. And then, of course, 2 years later, we had System 6.01. At the time, for people who were Apple watchers, we were being dangled carrots in front of our face by Apple. We were being told that we'll support you, Apple II forever. Yet the reality is we're very different. And, in the early 1990s, I think it became clear to everyone that the Apple II was eventually going to become an orphan. And was it 94? Lunatic and I went to the meeting at Apple, the infamous meeting at Apple, Operation Apple Store, where, what had happened is a local user group president, Ernie Moore, that some of you may know, arranged this meeting. I think it took a year. There was this delay, that delay. It was delayed at the last minute. I was ready to leave my house, and I got a call from Ernie saying,
Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
Hey, Sheppy.
Hey, we're going to take just a break from the video because Sheppy was kind enough to stop by. So we figured this would be of interest, and then we'll cut back to the video here in a little bit.
So how is everybody? I wish I was on my computer instead of my phone because you're all very, very tiny.
Probably better that way.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So it's been a while. I've been sidetracked by life and things. And I'm still tinkering, but I'm not as active as I was. I wish I was.
I remember your
what's up?
presentation from the first year that I came to Kansas Fest, and
Which year was that?
You are the luminary. Well, my first year was 2009, and you've been going for many years
Okay.
prior to that.
Oh yeah, the '93 was my first Kansas Fest.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I drove up with Dean Esme for that one from Shreveport.
Wow. Yeah, some of
because
the
we
Apple
had,
products were still shipping then.
yeah, we had um, we had our big Syndicom meetup before the actual event started that year, so it was a bunch of us there. It was a very busy year. We had a good time. We had a good time at all of them, really, and I'm looking forward to getting back. I keep almost managing to pull off making it, and then not quite getting there. Uh, Things have gotten more complicated for me. I've had medical stuff come up that has made it more difficult for me to get places and do stuff. So I have to pick and choose my battles. And unfortunately, family stuff seems to win all the time. Whatever. But yeah, I remember some of those early KansasFest. And I remember the presentation that was just being shown there, and Joe always had his way about him, and he was always fun to listen to. I had I had some issues with this particular presentation. It was a little I thought heavy-handed in terms of how it handled Apple, not because I didn't think Apple deserved it, but because they had representatives there. And so I thought maybe it was a little much. Um, but the but every time Joe gave a presentation, it was a feast. I don't know if there's a particular topic people are interested in talking about or hearing about or just listening to me babble
Oh, we've got
for a few
questions.
minutes. Fire away. I'm good to go.
So what brought you to KansasFest in 1993? Were you there representing a company, selling a product? What was your interest?
I had been wanting to attend one for several years, and I just because I had an interest, and the but that year it just worked out that I knew various people who were in a position to kind of drive with me to get up there. I wound up going through Shreveport to Soft Disk, hanging out for a day with Greg Templeman there, helping him finish up his projects for the issue of Soft Disk GS he was working on finishing up. And then he wasn't quite done yet, so I drove up with Dean Esme, and Greg followed up the next day. But I had wanted to go since the first time I heard of them back in '89. In fact, I was at Apple on a contract job working in their quality assurance department for Apple system software, Apple II system software in 1990 when Apple sent people to KansasFest. And I was like, is there any way I can go? And it's like, you're just a contractor, you don't get to go. And so it was, but it was fun to watch everybody trooping off to go to KansasFest and then coming on back. And once I'd been to one, though, I wanted to go to all of them. I didn't make them all, but I wanted to do every single one because I just had so much fun. It was so educational. And of course, my first one or two, I was just somebody attending mostly. And I hadn't really gotten, I had a couple of shareware things out, no big deal. It was not, I wasn't anybody special. I maintain that I'm still not. I'm just some guy who wrote a lot of little programs for the Apple II. But I it became like just this ongoing thing of going because both because I loved it and because it was a great way to kind of kick stuff out the door. Anytime I finished something, it was like, oh, if it's within 3 months of Kansas Fest, let's kick it out the door there instead of releasing it now. And it was always fun. And the various code monkeys for the Apple II, we always kind of nudged each other to, hey, if I've got something at Kansas Fest, if you don't, you're a loser kind of game. And we had a lot of fun giving each other a hard time like that. And just the encouraging each other to do something bigger and better than before every year was always really great. And I think that I think we saw that in the types of stuff that came out the door, kinds of software that people put out, and the stuff people produced, that we could create some really surprisingly amazing things for this little computer that could.
Is that, Sheppy, is that kind of where Hackfest came from? Like, was that just an evolution of people trying to get stuff done for Kansas Fest, or?
Yeah, sort of. It was a combination of things. I mean, it was a combination of that, but also I had actually heard of a Hackfest being done at another event, and it was just such a fun sounding idea, and one that I thought that my fellow Apple II programmers, both ones who were regulars and newcomers, could really get behind and have fun with. And I thought that the having a hack event where people are trying to create something fun and interesting that challenged their own skills, whatever their skill level was, and then that included some of the best known and most skilled Apple II programmers, where they could go for help and ask questions and all of that, was just a really great combination of resources. And I think that we got some really interesting new software out of Hackfest over time, where not only were they thrown out, kind of as a hack, but they wound up being cleaned up and finished up and put out the door as real products later on. And I thought, I think that was always one of the things I liked best about it, was that it encouraged people to try to create stuff that they might not have tried to do before.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask if you remember any of the kind of the programs that came out of that, like what any that like really stood out.
I it's been so long now that I don't remember all of the ones that actually wound up being like released as products or whatever. But some of the things that I really remember the most are the ones that weren't finished. The Sudoku solver that was only about half done, but it was done by somebody who had never really done anything like that before. Or so not even the winners necessarily, but the ones where people were kind of going for it, and yeah, they didn't make it, but they gave it their best shot, and that always really excited me, was to see somebody push themselves to do something new and interesting. And those were the ones that always got to me, were the ones like that. I always got a kick out of people who used HyperCard to do things that HyperCard shouldn't be used for. I think there was a block editor that was written in HyperCard. That one really blew my mind. That's not something HyperCard should be used for, but sure enough, they pulled it off. Things like that. Just the weird stuff really always got me excited. Was the weird stuff and the stuff that was unexpected.
Cool. All right, and Ken has asked us to ask you about Kansas Fest with the letter C.
Yeah, we had a year where people tried to make Wi-Fi antennas out of Pringles cans.
Mm-hmm.
And so we called that Kansas Fest with a C. I do not remember if anybody was successful.
So it actually ended up being Kansas Fest.
Yeah, I think it may have been. I had forgotten all about that. In fact, it took me a few seconds to remember what it was after you asked me about it.
I had always assumed that the earliest years of Kansas Fest were more like a professional conference where the primary goal was vendors to sell things and people to buy things. But
So
what you're telling me is it wasn't that way.
it was, so it wasn't. So the very first one was the Apple II Developer Conference, which was attached to a more traditional trade show type of event with booths and people selling stuff and all of that. So that was was a conference at there in Kansas City, and then attached to it was like a day or two of the Apple II Developer Conference. The original event, the trade show like event, only lasted a year or two, but the developer conference kind of kept going and became Kansas Fest over time as it kind of expanded into something for everybody, not just programmers. And so 1990, I want to say it was 92 or 93 was kind of the first year it was really broadly opened up to everybody. And from then on, it was very similar to what it has been, an event where we had, I think the first year I did it was the only year I went where we had like classrooms for sessions and things like that. And we had multiple tracks only the first handful of years of it that I was there. After that, it was like, we could just do a couple more days and just do a single track so everybody can go to anything they want to. And we just liked that better. Yeah.
Are you still in touch with some of the people that you met back then?
Yeah, some. I have a lot of Facebook friends from back then. And, there's people I'm in contact with. I mean, Ken, obviously, he actually is the reason why I got on Genie back then. He was, gosh, what, 14 or 15, and he wrote me a letter, like a snail mail letter saying, hey, you should sign up for Genie because that's where all the cool people are. And I was on America Online primarily back then. And I was like, oh, that's cute, kid. Yeah, whatever. And set the letter aside. And like a year later, I finally signed up for Genie. But yeah, I'm in touch with a few people. Not as many as I would like. Which is yet another reason I'm hoping to get back to Kansas Fest, is I know there's a few people from back then who still show up. And maybe not quite all the way back to the early 90s, but I know there's people who I know who are still going. So yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm thinking about all the people I haven't seen in 30 years. Oh man. And now I'm thinking about the fact that it's been 30 years. And now I'm thinking I'm old. Anyway.
Cool. Anything else that, I don't know, you want to talk to us about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll share a little something. I've kind of hinted at some, and I've talked about a little bit in various formats. And it's mostly a personal thing. I mentioned that I've had some health things come up, and between that and the real life stuff that's going on, I've been very slowly working on a new version of the Sweet 16 emulator, and it is taking its sweet time getting done. But I am still working on it. I have it running. I have something that resembles Sweet 16 running on the very latest Mac OS 10 on the M4, my M4 processor, and it's emulating about 560 megahertz of GS ridiculousness. And I'm fairly happy with that. It's mostly user interface stuff that I'm still hooking up because so much has changed that I'm having to redo the entire user interface basically from scratch. And so getting all of the disk management and all of that kind of stuff wired up to user interface is taking time. And I'm never happy with what it looks like. So I do some work on it and then I undo some of the work on it and then I do the work on it again. And it just keeps getting a little closer to what I want. I keep hoping, my original hope had been to have an alpha or a beta in time for this, but that ship sailed a while ago. I'm going to try to get something by the end of the year, but we'll see how it goes. It probably won't feel much like Sweet 16, just user interface wise, because a lot of it won't be done yet, probably when it does come out the door. But it'll be making good progress, and I think having people using it again will kind of help nudge me into making faster headway on it than I've been.
Yeah, and just like you were saying, KansasFest would push people to finish their software. So maybe KansasFest 2026 come back in person and have full version of
full version.
16.
That would be a great goal, and I'm going to shoot for that. I don't know if I can promise it, but I'm going to shoot for that.
Cool.
That would be awesome. 2GS running on the M4.
Yeah, it is ridiculously fast. It's really quite something to see. I never thought I would see numbers like those. So, wow.
Anything else?
Nothing comes immediately to mind. I hope that everybody has a good event and lots of interesting stuff happens. I'm looking forward to hearing the scoops.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us.
Sure. I'm glad I got invited.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sheppy. It's been really good to see you again.
Yep.
And some of your old KansasFest videos are out there on our YouTube channel.
Cool.
And
that's awesome. I'm glad to hear it. All right. Okay. Well, you all take care of yourselves. I am going to go and get some rest because I've had a very, very long day.
All right. Take care.
Take care, y'all. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks again. I was really fortunate that we had Sheppy join us unexpectedly. He's a wealth of knowledge about the Apple II, particularly the GS, and the history of our hobby and community.
Not to mention Sweet 16, which was freaking awesome.
Yeah, I don't remember when Sweet 16 was released, but it was one of the first, if not the first, 2GS emulator.
And was it Sheppy who ported Castle Wolfenstein 3D?
Yep.
To the 2GS?
Yep, that's right.
Single-handedly building the market for the transport. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does work.
Yeah.
Does work beautifully
killer
with an
app.
accelerator.
The killer app for transwarps.
Yeah. I was asking Sean the other day. I was like, because I don't have a accelerator in my 2GS, just because it's kind of one of those things. It's like if you're one of those people that would buy an Amiga 500, who knows who those people are? Where it's like you could just basically buy it because everything is aimed at the lowest hardware, and so it's like, yeah, it'd be neat, but it's like, what's the point? And he goes, I don't know. Have you ever opened up a window on the inside GSOS? I'm like, I don't know. That's $700 for. All right. Are we resuming?
Yeah, I think we pick up on Joe's video.
All right.
And then I don't know what else we have coming up after that offhand.
We have a great presentation It's by some guy. I don't even know if you guys will know who this guy is. That he's got some kind of involvement with something at Apple. I guess we'll see.
It's a good thing we put that one later because I'm sure no one will know the gentleman.
He called a minute later. I would have driven down to Apple. And we didn't really know what to expect. We were having a meeting with Apple to say, so tell us, what are you folks doing? You know, what are you going to do for us? And about halfway through the meeting, they just kind of let drop. Oh, by the way, we're going to discontinue the Apple IIgs next month. If I remember correctly, it was strange. People didn't get crazy. They didn't get upset. I know when I left there, I felt relief. I know that's strange because, you know, I've been making my money with the Apple II for almost a decade. I like to think that I'm one of the biggest proponents. It had literally driven me crazy trying to figure out, what is Apple doing? You know, what are their plans for the Apple II? Are they going to support it or aren't they? So when they announced the discontinuation, as far as I was concerned, I was relieved. Let's jump ahead 5 years. And last October, Peggy Johnson, who's our secretary, she got a phone call from a woman. And, you know, as a user group, we have our number listed with Apple, and a number of us get phone calls. Hi, I got your name or your number from Apple's 800 user group locator number. Actually, these days, if anyone calls up Apple Computer, they're 1-800-SOS-APPLE, APPL. I'm having a problem with my computer. Well, what computer do you have? As soon as you say Apple II, what's your zip code? And they then look up the name and phone number of your nearest user group and tell you, contact so-and-so. And they don't always tell you that it's a user group. So I know I get calls all the time. They think I'm, you know, an office from Apple or a dealer. And so Peggy got a phone call from someone, help, I'm having problems with my computer. And I guess she started describing the computer. Peggy got a little confused because she mentioned, well, there's something about the built-in disk drive. Well, the only built-in disk drive on an Apple II has been on the IIc. And she was saying, no, it's a 2GS. Well, as often happens, it was, well, why don't you bring your computer to the next meeting? And, you know, quite often what we found is that people have problems. One of us can fix it. And Ray McAnally was still actively involved, and Ray's our guy, Mr. Fix-It, who can fix anything. And so, as it turned out, Ray was there that day. You know, he really hadn't been active in the club, but he was there that day. So a woman came walking in with the computer. I was up in front of the room, talking like I am now. If I remember right, there was actually a disc hanging out. I looked over, and as all of you know me, I'm never at a loss for words. You know, when it comes to the Apple II, I can go on forever. I was dumbfounded. I was dumbstruck. I just kind of said, whoa, what's that? I went running over and saw that. I went, could it be? Could it really be? Turned it over. And on the bottom, there's a sticker. Mark Twain, EVT, evaluation, well, maybe you know exactly what it stands for.
Evaluation.
Yeah, it was, I think, evaluation unit. Serial number 9. Oh my God. That's what they told me about that user group convention 5 years ago. Well, it was kind of interesting. I think that meeting was total chaos. Nothing really happened because, you know, the guy in charge was a little preoccupied. I said, I want it. I'll want it. How much do you want for it? It's not for sale. And she actually had 2 complete computers and a spare motherboard. They're not for sale. Now, the meeting kind of was over. I got distracted. Ray McAnally, who, not to put Ray down, because he and I are really good friends, but Ray is kind of a New Jersey hustler. And he's a fast talker. Lo and behold, well, I'm saying, how much do you want for it? I'll give you anything. And she's saying, it's not for sale. Ray kind of got to her. He agreed to take a look at the computer to fix it if possible. And he called me up and he said, look, I'm going to make a deal with her. There are 2 computers, there's 1 spare motherboard. Here's what I intend to do. I intend to chat you up to them to say, yeah, Joe Kohn, he deserves this computer. He wants it, but I also want one. And what he ended up doing is the problem with the computer, it was kind of interesting. The 3 different prototypes, they're all prototypes, 2 in cases, complete with the hard drive and the disk, and 1 just the motherboard. The motherboard in the computer that she had brought in had a very strange problem. And what happened is that when you turned it on and we're using GSOS software, there were stripes, vertical bars running down the computer. And it seemed like it was the video chip that might have been fried. That video chip, unfortunately, is soldered in, so you can't just, take it out and replace it. So what Ray ended up doing, and in a way I'm very disappointed with how he did it. He didn't mark which motherboard came out of which machine, but he just started kind of taking parts and said, this motherboard is shot. I can't do anything with it. So he started swapping parts. He put them back into the cases, but we do not know. So this box says prototype number 9. It might be 9. It might be 5. 5 was the other one. And what's interesting is when I take it apart, you're going to see wire wrap. You're going to see that this computer is not complete. It couldn't be sold to someone in a store because it's it's an engineering evaluation unit. It's in a sense a work in progress. The motherboard in the machine that she was using on a day-to-day basis didn't have wire wrap. It was different. No, I can't say very different. It was a little different. The basic chips were the same in there, but what had happened, I guess the way that these things work is they build a prototype and they start testing it and they say, oh, we blew it, we made a mistake. And sometimes the mistakes have to do with miswiring, traces of a motherboard, so that as you open this up, you see all this yellow wire that basically is there to correct the problems that were on the motherboard. Well, the machine that had been in day-to-day use didn't have any of that. So we have to assume, therefore, it was a later model than this. Now, again, no one at Apple is talking, so I do not know, and I don't think anyone knows, when this project officially started. The box that this came in has a date on it and a name on it, and it says April 91. The markings inside say June 91. The meeting I had with the Apple people was July 91. So, I mean, it's obvious that this project was, really getting going and died in 91. But, how many previous prototypes there have been, who knows?
Something about the way Apple works is that EBT units, the motherboards get swapped all the time. And so the motherboard that you have in there may or may not have been the original one from there. Most likely the original motherboard that was in that case, you don't own. No one owns. Most likely it was trashed somewhere at Apple, the one that actually came with the case. The probably just kept those cases and kept swapping out motherboards, a newer motherboard, a newer motherboard.
Well, yeah. Well, when we take it apart, we'll see there's a different EVT number written on the I guess it's a little piece of tape inside, and so that's entirely conceivable. And now, two of the machines have, in fact, the two that are in use right now are the same, or almost the same, in the fact that they have the wire ramp. And so, this machine is not, it never was finalized. So it's still, in being a prototype, it isn't 100% stable. We found out that because of the weight of the hard drive and 3.5-inch assembly that's also connected to the power supply, it was putting pressure on the motherboard, and on the underside of the motherboard, sometimes it was making contact. And notice, I don't have the monitor on top here, because if I did, the machine probably wouldn't work because of the pressure. So this thing is definitely a work in progress. The fact that I ended up getting 2 of them from this meeting at Grabenstein back in October is almost miraculous. Immediately after the meeting, I had to go shoot my big mouth off on Gene. I posted a message saying, "You're not going to believe what just happened." Well, that message got spread around a little. And this gentleman, Jim Pittman, who's involved with the Albuquerque, New Mexico Apple user group, read it. He knows me. He and I have been in contact through email. He read about this Mark Twain. He was reminded of how a year before he'd been sitting his job, when he's not involved with the Apple II, is he works at the University of New Mexico computer lab. And a woman had come in there, and this is in Albuquerque, a woman had come in there, and it was kind of funny. He said he has all these Unix boxes and, Macs and PCs laying there, and he also has an Apple IIc, his own personal computer. And the woman looked at the IIc and said, "Oh, I used to work at Apple." And they started talking, and, "Oh, what's your name?" "Jane Lee." Well, Jane Lee had been, I can't remember her exact title, but she had been in the number maybe 2 spot of the Apple II division. Now, Jim Pittman, they started talking. She said, "Yeah, I have a prototype 2GS that was never released." He didn't, he had never heard her name. He thought, impossible. So he didn't follow up on it. He read my message, and he went, "Whoa." He wrote to me, he said, "By any chance, do you know the name Jane Lee?" I said, "Of course I do. She was, like the number 2 person in the Apple II division." He contacted her. Lo and behold, she lent her Mark Twain computer to the Albuquerque user group, I think in January. And in comparing, maybe some of you saw, they actually took some pictures and posted them online. And if you look closely at the motherboard, you can see the wire wrap. You can see the same as this. Jane Lee said that she believed that there were 20 of these in existence. None had ever been, in a sense, plowed under. And, there's, I guess, rumors back when Apple killed off the Apple III that they just took them to a landfill and crushed them.
Elisa.
Was it Elisa?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I keep hearing stories. Oh, Apple, they took it to the land dump and, bulldozed them. Well, apparently these have, the 20 are around. It's my understanding that people who worked at Apple, names that when you look at who wrote System 6 or 6.01, that those folks have that. They're not talking. Maybe this guy who worked at Apple and was friends with them, maybe, I don't know, have they ever said anything to you about this?
I know Dave Lyons has one. Matt Etheridge had one. I don't know what.
Yeah.
Jim Murphy most likely has one. Tim Swihart. might have one, and Nicholas might have one.
Now, those are all the same that I've kind of, I guess you could say, grapevine heard, but none of them are talking. None of them are saying anything. Really, when I wrote an email, they said, that doesn't exist. There's no such thing. I don't know if any of you have ever had to sign a non-disclosure agreement with Apple, but it sort of says, if you shoot your mouth off about this, we're going to take your firstborn. I mean, it's almost like that. And so people that work at Apple are not allowed to talk to the public about what they did. And so, you know, it's kind of interesting when a number of years ago, I actually got together with an Apple II engineer who told me there have been 25 Apple IIs that have been built, that have been tested, that were never released. And the way Apple works, it's kind of a myth. Not a myth, that's not the word. You know, things at Apple, things at computer companies are different than in the real world, or the world that, you know, most people are used to. And one of the common ways that things got done at Apple is that people, you know, just as all of us are kind of addicted to the Apple II, you know, some of us may be more obsessed than others. The people that work at Apple, you know, all the people that put out System 6.01, in essence, they came up through the ranks. They were users, programmers, engineers, and, you know, they put in their time as users. And eventually they got jobs at Apple, and with access to all this technology and testing devices, and a lot of times what happened, the kind of common way products were developed for the Apple II is one or two people would kind of do it in their spare time at night. And, you know, it wasn't like that they were authorized to build things. But I think this started way back when, at the beginning, you know, the whole hacker mentality, Steve Jobs and Wozniak in their garage, and, you know, they didn't, as anyone that saw that Triumph from the Nerds the other night, that great PBS show, if you have a chance, see it. It's really good, that early history of the computer industry. Things were not done the way they are at, like, you know, Ford or General Motors, where, you know, it's everything's top down. So we're not sure if something like this was put together by one or two people working on their own at home. And
I can assure you that it wasn't, if they had 20 prototypes like that.
But it may have started like that.
They may have started working on it like that, but I'm sure very early on they really decided they were going to do that.
Well, it's obvious, and after this is over, I mean, I really do want to take this apart and show you things. You can see that this is a standard 2GS case. This hole in the front, if you look close, it's not real smooth. This is not done by a machine, an assembly line. This is cut by hand, or, you know, some power thing. However, on the back, you can see that this definitely was in a professional machine shop, because there are different holes on the back, different little connections, and they're not rough. They've been, you know, obviously Apple has a, you know, a very expensive, expensive equipment that they use to build computers. And so some of this was, you know, kind of hand done, and some was done in the shop. Now, keep in mind, this machine came out in, well, let's start it up for you. When it starts up, whoop, look at that, ROM version 3, 1987 to 89. Okay, so it starts up just like a standard ROM what's on here. I ended up putting back. I wanted you to see exactly how this came. So even though I had a newer version of the system on here, I put back what this is a pre-release version of System 6. And, well, I'll show you in the About box. It's something like System 6.D.44, which when I see that, it says, boy, this must be the 44th revision of System 6. I mean, I wasn't a beta tester. I had never seen a pre-release version of System 6 before. And so this, I believe, an insider told me it was called Rand. That was the code name for System 6. And this was a pre-release version of it. And let's go to the About. Yeah, System 6.0D44 by Andy Nicholas, copyright 87 to 91. So this is, you know, I mean, obviously this is different. This is something that has not come out before. When I got the computer, there were, well, I guess 5.04 came on 2 disks. System 6 came on 6. This came with 3 disks that had the system. Everything was basically, you know, the same, except there are a few things that were never included. A screensaver. And, you know, I just have to assume that that was just, you know, something thrown together by one of the people working on it, and maybe they didn't have room on the disk. And so it came with AppleWorks, GS, and HyperCard. AppleWorks GS is the current version of it. If we go up and get a, you'll see it's the same as October 23, 1989. I had to reinstall my AppleWorks GS the other day. As I keep telling people, when you have to do weird things, just copy it back from, you know, from 3.5-inch disk to your hard drive. I did, and I noticed October 23rd, 1989. So this is the latest version. HyperCard, not so. I believe that the HyperCard originally came out in, boy, I'm mixing up my dates. It was announced at that final Apple Fest in Long Beach, which was, that was 89? Seriously? Ooh. Boy, I thought it was 90. But, so this came with, I believe it's the original release of HyperCard. We can get a date. Huh. July 8th, 1991, July 23rd, 1991. That puts it right within a week or so of that meeting I had with Apple. So this was, at the time, the most current version. I believe that an update was released after this. Well, it says 1.1. Well, my dates are not, I just turned 49, they say. Memory is the first thing that goes. Second thing, I can't remember. But, you know, everything else is fairly standard. You know, a number of people have said, well, so what's different about this machine? And what's different?
Oops, sorry, I was muted. Hey, gang. What I was going to say is our next presentation might be slightly more lively. Do we want to maybe post because there's maybe about 45 minutes left on this, and it is a lot of like very distant shots of this. Do we want to maybe go to our next video, and then we can just provide a link in the chat for anybody that wants to watch what would essentially be part 2 of this. Is that fair?
I think that would be excellent, Ron.
That sounds
Okay.
good. Yeah.
I mean, no offense.
Good idea.
I really think this is a very interesting topic, but I also feel like it's been going on for the whole of my adult life.
Agreed.
It is long.
It's a real Bilbo, like too much butter or butter spread across too much bread kind of situation
Spread
right now.
thin.
Yes. So
It is insightful to hear how people at the time were looking at the Apple II, looking at the market opportunities, looking at the computers and the evolution. And these are some of the details that don't get written down anywhere.
Absolutely. And this presentation is out on the YouTubes. Oh no, I have revealed who our next person might be. It's
Now
but
you've done
he's
it.
just some nobody, so it's fine. It's fine. So, well, I know that there was a couple people that need to hop off for dinner and things like that. Jay needed to get moving because time zone differences and things like that. Is there anybody else that needs to kind of exit, and then we'll play the video, and then are we going to come back for a wrap up, or is this going to be the wrap up here?
I think this should be the wrap up. Keep getting pretty late, and we'll have a early start tomorrow. And tomorrow is packed.
Yes.
Peter, can you remind us when we start tomorrow and what's at the top?
Yeah, so we start tomorrow at, making sure I get the time zones right, I believe it's 8:45, is that right?
Yep.
Okay, we start tomorrow at 8:45. We'll do a brief kickoff, pretty similar to what you saw today. Then we'll drop into the presentations. Our first presentation will be a featured speaker, Jeff Mazer. Will talk about how the Apple II changed his life. Then we'll move on to other topics. We have a presentation from Jay Graham about the Blue SCSI. We have the Dealer Day display from Qatar. We heard a bit about that earlier. We also have others. We have a TangyPack presentation. We hear the Chuck Morrow interview. We hear the first part of our Dan Bricklin interview, more about the Apple IIc, double high res, the Apple II TS emulator, Douglas Engelbart, and then Packet Radio. And that goes most of the day. We wrap up tomorrow with the Apple II Forever Awards, and then we'll do it again Sunday.
Cool.
Take a look at the schedule.
I'm excited.
People should expect to get an email tomorrow morning with the link, right, for tomorrow's stream?
Yes, there will be a new link every day. You'll get an email first thing in the morning with the updated link. There is also an email sent out earlier this week with all the links, but if you don't get it, DM me or anybody on Discord, email me, and we'll make sure you get taken care of. We will do our best to stick to the schedule, so if there's something you really want to make, it should start on time.
Cool. And that's 8:45 Central Time.
Yes.
Correct. 8:45 Central Time. All of our times are in Central because that's where Kansas City is. At this point, it's arbitrary.
Yep. But don't forget, if you go out and actually look at the map but the schedule on Google, it will localize it for wherever you live. So if you're in Newfoundland and you have one of those half-hour time zones, it'll do all the heavy lifting for you. You don't have to calculate anything. All right.
Any other questions about tomorrow?
I'm excited.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo!
It'll be great.
Yep. I think it'll be a good time.
All right. Everybody have a good night. Don't stay up too late doing your Hackfest unless you want to.
Stay up really late. Make your Hackfest awesome.
Cool. All right. We'll see you guys tomorrow morning.
See you in the morning.
All right. And so what have we got taking us out?
Oh, it's going to be great.
The magic of type design was coming through, saving us money here, there, and there, and really gave us a powerful floppy disk where the processor did a lot of the work instead of just hardware. And We took it to the CES show, almost ready to say, run checkbook, and it would run the checkbook program. Or run Colorman, and it would run Colorman program. Almost there. And so Randy and I kind of would go down the strip of Las Vegas to the convention center, and I taught him how to play craps. I remember earlier years I taught Steve, no, I think that was I taught Steve how to play craps after that, but I've been to Reno, but Randy was he was underage, but he won about $35. But we'd go down, then we'd get to the convention center, and we'd sit there all night long, and got the program completely working. You could say run checkbook, and it would run it on the computer, and it was so amazing. And I said, okay, before we go to bed, let's just make a copy of this disc and compare track 1, track 2, track. We compared it track at a time to be right. So I put it in and ran a program that read track 1, and then I put another disc in, right track 1. Then I said, read track 2. A lot of swapping back and forth, 34 tracks. Got the disc copied, and then I was sort of looking at them, I couldn't tell which was which. And I said, uh-oh. Turned out I copied the bad one to the good. Oh. Well, it's okay. Went to bed, woke up at 10, redid it from scratch, from my memory. We actually did contribute to that show. So this was a big turning point for us. Now, it coincided, the floppy disk that we came out with coincided with a new program coming out from the East Coast, VisiCal. VisiCal, the first spreadsheet. Now, let's look at the spreadsheet and the floppy disk drive and make a real useful solution. It's fast, it's usable by a small businessman, it can do things that there's no other way you can do that efficiently in the world. Both of those programs need a lot of RAM. Okay, in those days, the Apple II, the minimum Apple II was 4K of RAM, and thank God I designed around dynamic RAM. All the other hobby computers were using static RAMs, but they were going to be too expensive and too many chips was my reason. I'll take a little extra time to design for dynamic RAMs because I save chips. And then there was Radio Shack and Commodore. Commodore PET, Radio Shack TRS-80, and Apple II. Three kind of pre-built computers you could buy in the world, and they were all getting their start, getting their notoriety. But VisiCal needed, the other two were stuck at 4K of RAM, or 8K of RAM, no expandability. They had no slots to plug in boards to add a floppy disk. So we were able to expand and add a floppy disk drive that we hadn't thought of at first, and we were able to add RAM up to any amount needed for a floppy disk drive operating system, or for VisiCal. Both of those things needed more RAM. So the other two competitors were basically out of the water with this sort of product, and we kind of took over the world with the floppy disk and VisiCal, and all of a sudden it looked like the small business market was 10 times the game market, and it really jerked Apple around. But the other two companies kind of had to go back to the drawing board. It took them a year to finally get products out that could do the same sort of thing. And that was a very important lead in the early days of the Apple II. So pretty much that was what was to take us from there with a few enhancements, floating point arithmetic, and floating point basic, and some other things. Going to take us all the way to going public. Around this time, we started thinking Steve Jobs was always very, very worried that IBM and companies like that are just looking over your shoulder and they're going to pounce on you in 6 months. You know, if you don't have something really incredibly new, you know, you have to move very fast to stay ahead of them. Like Mark will felt, no, we're good people, they're good people. We can go with we can design the speed they have. We have our lead. And so we set out to design the Apple III. Everybody was buying Apple IIs now, and you would buy an Apple II with an 80-column board. Most of you remember that. And you would buy extra memory, a memory card. We said, why don't we build the one machine businessmen want? It's like an Apple II, but it has the 80 columns, and it has the extra memory, and it's the Apple III. But because there's so much software out for the Apple II, so many games and databases and other programs, we'll have a switch so when you boot it up, it's an Apple II or it's an Apple III. You choose. But then we actually, in engineering, it was strange. We had to put chips in it to disable functions in the Apple II mode. Because marketing said, well, you've got to have people want to buy Apple IIs for the home and hobby, and Apple IIIs for business. So you have to disable and make it weaker when it's an Apple II. And so it's one of the few times in my life I saw chips added to slow things down. They basically turned off the 80 columns and they turned off the extra memory. Don't ask me why. The Apple III had hardware problems from day one, which helped get it a bad name, bad reputation with dealers. It didn't sell well. Even when we fixed the problems a year later, it had a bad enough name, it never sold. And it probably cost the company about $300 million. We officially acknowledged $60 million. And the reason I say $300 million is because whenever I went by the company, everybody there had an Apple III on their desk, and everyone was working on the latest Apple III projects. So almost all the salaries in the company, except the person who reprints the price list, were for the Apple III. It was the largest selling computer. The Apple II was still the largest selling computer in the world for 1980, 81, and 82, up to 83 when the PC took it over. So in those 3 years, every single Apple ad in Time Magazine, Newsweek Magazine, and the like showed an Apple III. Never showed an Apple II. It's like we had disowned it inside the company, but it was selling hugely because there were 100 companies outside of us that were advertising and building products for it. So it kind of had this huge external world, you know. We were just lucky we had the base to it. And it was really bringing in these huge profits that let us experiment with the Apple III, which accidentally, it was a good product, but little accidents in life can, you know, make people not buy it, not want to buy it. John Sculley came on, recognized that there was a problem here. We were putting too much internal effort. It was all into the Apple III, which wasn't selling. The Apple III should be a smaller part of the company relative to its sales, and we should revive the Apple II, which is eventually what led to the Apple II GS and some other variations along the way. I think for this audience, I think I'm going to stop my speech here and go to questions because my throat's tired, you're all tired, it's been a long time, and you're welcome to ask any questions on up through today, and I'll give you the answers you want. So thanks for putting especially when you stand up. I mean, I never understood the value of standing ovations until I'm popular in the local schools because of all I've done with them. And they would even invite me, the kids all wanted me in their musicals and their plays. So I went on quite a few. I even wore tights and dance, and I can't dance, I can't sing. Any of that, but they always came up with parts for me, and then one night, I remember one night we did a great performance and we had a standing ovation, how great that was. I later heard that one of my friends in the front row was just clapping real loudly, and he was the first one to stand up and get the others to do it. Not planned. But one of the things I managed to do in life for well over a decade is my $2 bills. I've got pads of them, and I can tear them along the perforation. So they're unusual because they smell like new money. And they look like new money. They're fresh paper, and they've got the right feel, and they're on sheets. And if you look at every serial number right away, it looks like the serial numbers are the same. And I always wonder, I don't know if that's the right president, and they're perforated, and they're in pads, and there's just too much about them that I'm just not sure is legal. But I found out that if they meet the specs of the U.S. government, by law they are legal tender. These are legal tender. They meet the specs of the U.S. government. And they cost $3 each. That's what I have to pay for them. So there aren't very many people that actually go around spending. Actually, these were bought by the government. One of the specs of the U.S. government is they have to make it. These are legitimate. You buy them this way. You don't buy them on pads. I had a printer go into pads and put perforations on them. One time I was in Las Vegas because my daughter was in a high-level gymnastics meet. She's a national athlete. And they warm up for a long time. So my wife and I walked down to the Hard Rock Casino. And I tipped a waitress 2 of these because they like them. The waitress would say, "Wow, how neat! You know, it's perforated. I'll give it to my son. You know, I like these $2 bills." And then the casino manager came over and talked to me. He says, "Where'd you get those?" And I said, "Well, the guy sells tickets down on the strip. You know." That was the only lie I told him. And they started saying, "Well, they don't make them like this." And I said, "Oh, they don't?" And he says, "No." They're counterfeit. They're counterfeit? And he says, "No, we test them with a pen and get the fibers in them, and they're not counterfeit." And I said, "Oh." They said they don't make them like this. So finally, he's trying to get it out of me, and I said, "On sheets." He says, "Oh, they make them on sheets." They do. They make them on sheets, but not like this. And he's rubbing the perforation with his thumb. And I wouldn't say perforation, so finally he had to say perforated. And I said, "Oh, they don't?" And he says, you know, and then finally I thought I'll really get him. This guy is showing no emotions. You know, some security people are good at that. Total poker face. Just having a discussion, you know, for the data and the facts. I said, "You think they have different serial numbers, or something about there's the serial numbers. You think the serial numbers would go in order, or something like that. And he looks down, and the serial numbers all end with the same digits and start with the same digits. So a quick glance makes them look the same. His jaw went. When he looked at it, and then he looked longer, composed himself, didn't give on that I got it, but I got it. So I went down to the gymnastics meet, told my wife, when your machine finishes off, you come down. And eventually they started the meet, 10 minutes, 20, 30, 40. My wife's not there. Where is she? You know, how could her machine be that hot, you know? And then finally she shows up. She says, that guy wants to talk to you, Secret Service. So I go down, and it turns out that I think the appropriate procedure would be just get my name. Just look at my ID, get my name. No, he wants to find a room. Then he wants a private room. And, okay, on the way to the private room, I want to go to the bathroom. Well, when you're at a urinal, there's a Secret Serviceman right behind you. You get stage fright or something. So we go into this room. We go to this room, and he has a chrome briefcase. He opens it up. He pulls out a little laminate card and says, I'm going to read you your Miranda rights. And I am thinking, oh my gosh, I played rights, but all my life I'm not going to have my Miranda rights ever read to me. So what do? You say, sorry, I don't want to talk to you. Well, no, they've got the rights of man have been disintegrated, and they'll hold you for 72 hours or something, and I don't have a toothbrush with me. So I had to go through a 40-minute interrogation. He wanted to know every fact of my life, where I was born, my birth dates, my parents, their birthdays, my siblings, their birthdays, my passport number, my license number. I knew them all. My license plate, my social security number. And then he goes, and all my phone numbers I'd ever had. And then he goes, what's your vehicle ID number? Yeah, right. I said, well, got me. So we discussed these bills. I couldn't remember where I got it perforated and all that. And for a long time, when we were all done, I said, oh, thank God, I thought you were after me for my daughter winning $7,500 at Keno. Well, my daughter, she was 9 years old the first time. I'd taken her to Las Vegas twice. The first time was with a group of kids for a thing called Mac Academy at Caesar's Palace. So all the kids filled out Keno forms at one lunch. And my daughter wins $1,600 on a $1 Keno ticket. And I'm sitting there, you know, just astounded. Of course, she copied one of my tickets, so I wanted to. And she's so lucky, and you know, my other little dinky kid who's 6 years old thought he was a hero winning $98, but now he thought his win was puny. So Sarah, 9 years old, won that big one. Now we're back for her gymnastics meet. We had breakfast in the garage, and I said, Sarah, when you gamble, you have to expect you're going to have some fun with your money, and you're going to lose it. That's just what you have to go out thinking in advance. You don't. Your win was the highest percentage of anyone I've ever known in my life that they won, $1,600 to 1. You know, so you just have to expect you lose it. We're sitting there eating breakfast, and I looked up at the Keno board. She won $7,500. So she's
kids. They got no respect.
What?
Kids, they got no respect.
Yeah, she was also the one who always grabbed my spare change. So she ran big things full of money. Yeah, she's doing very well in her life. Never got an A since middle school. Had every college in the country trying to recruit her. And chose the right one for a reason of passion. I got through her on that. She's at the right college for her. Also, oddly enough, the college she chose, the other top divers, you know, swimming, diving, the other top divers, female divers in the West, all chose the same college. Didn't even have a name before. So they won the Pac-10 for swimming, diving this year. They got all these freshmen that are better than the seniors. So that's kind of neat. But I'll say athletes got it made. They get the classes they want. They get them first. The athletic department registers them. They get the dorm they want. They get everything. Never do that. Anyway, questions? Back.
I had read once that the guys who invented VisiCalc offered it to Apple at one time to sell.
Mike Barklow claims he was working very closely to guide the development of VisiCalc. I didn't ever hear from either of those two people, Bricklin or Bob Frankston, that they had an offer from Apple to buy it or offered it to Apple. I never heard such a thing. They could not implement it for the Commodore or the Radio Shack for reasons I gave, memory. The Apple was the only one with the characteristics. And what did come out initially on cassette tape, real short term, but it really made it on a floppy disk. It was like, yeah, the first killer app.
I have one related to that. Why was the spreadsheet which we produced so controversial?
Okay, then eventually, after VisiCalc, a programmer at Apple, Randy Wigington, whom I mentioned before, just a little beyond his high school years. He had the favor of Mike Scott, our president, who believed in skunkworks projects, little things that are kind of done unofficially under the counter, and set Randy up with printers and computers and a little money to develop because Randy wanted to do a spreadsheet on his own. Thought he could do a great one. Randy went off and did the spreadsheet. I actually got involved and did some great disk routines that made it boot up in like nothing flat. Because and when I presented it to the executive staff at Apple, it was the one time ever I saw a presentation that got an ovation from them. It was so good, and it was going to be sold by Call Apple. Yeah, Randy just wanted to kind of give it away. It was sold by Call Apple as TAG spreadsheet. Somehow Apple found out about it, and I guess personal software put pressures on them. I was never close enough to the business and marketing ends to know the real story, but all of a sudden Apple went to Call Apple and said, you cannot sell this. And they had a certain number that they had. They said, okay, you can sell just those number, and you have to put a sticker in that says courtesy of Steve Jobs and Mike Scott, which were the two that were killing it.
Val wrote something about that earlier.
Yeah, it was a little strange. I still have a precious copy of that.
We've got a few more for you.
Yeah, good spreadsheet for its day.
Multi-part question. One, do you still own an Apple II? And two, what is your favorite peripheral for the Apple II that you weren't involved in designing?
Sure. I still own Apple IIs. I don't use them, but I have a couple in boxes that were off kind of a late Apple IIe run. I have Apple IIcs in storage right now, or I gave them to my parents and they're on a display at a local the community college I went to briefly. I gave them a bunch of stuff to display. The Apple IIc was my favorite, but of the products, the peripherals, I would definitely say the Applied Engineering board that had CPM and I forget if it was a speed up or something, extra memory.
The ZRAM Ultra.
It was definitely in my Apple IIc. It just made the ZRAM so beautiful, and I loved having the CPM in it. So that was probably my favorite card of all of them. And then peripherals, also the Corvus came out with that 5 gigabyte drive, real expensive. 5 megabyte. 5 megabyte. 5 megabyte. Can't even, my memory. 5 megabytes, and boy, that gave me the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, quite a changing world.
You know, we know of some products that haven't made it out of Apple, GS ROM 4, for example, but are there any other projects, what do you think is the biggest thing that didn't come out of Apple that nobody ever heard of?
I can't answer that question because I'd have to think that for so long, and I'm not around most of the products in Apple that don't come out. I don't pry it here nowadays, and back when, I knew of so many, but I'd have to really toss my memory around and think if there was one that I thought really should have come out that didn't. I thought pretty much the main products were the right ones that did come out from Apple. I think it was good. Some were canceled internally, not put into production. They were good product ideas, but they wouldn't sell enough per month, like the Apple IIx. I don't think was a bad decision. I think Apple was right in those cases.
And then also, what's your current relationship with Steve Jobs?
What's my current relationship with Steve Jobs? We're friends. We get together once in a while. We've actually got a meeting with the 5 of us that ran the company the first couple of years. It's coming up very soon. I occasionally send him emails about either a new product that I discovered, oops, something's wrong on all 3 of the ones I got, or he doesn't like to hear it either. Fights it. No, it's right. Any negative words I just don't like. Go down once in a while and share just thoughts about what I'm doing with the computer, problems I'm having. The last meeting I had was the first really kind of negative one I've had in ages. Usually it's just all these things they recognize, but I started out wrong by mentioning that, I like my analog phone. Well, Apple's moving into digital phones, so it wasn't the right thing to say. It started off the day very badly. And then when I went into the problems with stuff he'd done on stage with the president of Singular there, and my problems with Singular, getting the least bit of information from their technical support, their product support, and their sales support people, and what a nightmare, and never got through it, never got the answers, and finally figured out with AT&T only because of a webpage that told me how to do it. He didn't like hearing that because he's got his own associations, and technologies in mind. But pretty much, yeah, we just share what's going on. He shares a little bit of what's going on in Apple, and it's interesting to me. So it's cordial. It's not close. We don't go to each other's parties all the time or anything. Live in the same area. He invites me to all of the movie premieres from his company, but I don't like to go to big formal events, so I've skipped them all so far.
Where are Mike Markla and Mike Scott?
Mike Markla is pretty much retired from Apple, off the board now, and he's got a nice home that he really took an estate and made it into an incredible paradise up in Woodside. I mean, just taking out swamps and creating lakes that that don't have this kind of algae in them that don't need any chlorine, but you have to mow the algae underneath. And he's got a great golf course on his property. Well, it's really like, I think it's 3 holes with 6 tee-off points. They couldn't work out that great. And he loves just design stuff. It took a long time designing his house on a Macintosh, every bit of it. Getting just the right mathematical formulas for the curves of the staircase is important to him. He's very interested in programming in the HyperCard, and Revolution now is a product that takes the old HyperCard stacks and he gets that up to date. He loves to do that just for fun. He's great. And Mike Scott, I don't hear from too often. I try to get in touch with him even recently, but haven't really been in close touch. But he apparently shows gems at shows and collects gems. That's part of his life. Mike Scott was kind of bitter when he was kind of kicked out by Markle and others just for making bad decisions or something they said, but he had taken the company from 0 to huge going public. So deserves a lot of commendation. Rod Holt was our other early engineer, and he likes to sail and has a house up in Piedmont. Don't hear from him. Bill Fernandez was really our 3rd employee after Steve and I, but he got employee number 4 because he couldn't leave Hewlett Packard, where he worked as my technician. He couldn't leave until a few months. There was a certain time frame there, and Bill Fernandez was the one that introduced me to Steve Jobs. Very important. Worked for Hewlett Packard, worked at Apple, and lives in Albuquerque and does a lot of computer graphics type support work for people, photography and through 3D graphics. I had him actually come down and help tutorial my class a little bit. I try to take advantage of people I know. Actually, not too long ago, I got interested in taking a class into music, and I had all these Nashville singers that I admired, country singers even. I had them all agreeing to come to my class, some top names. And then I decided to start this company, so the classes ended after that Sunday and never came off the club.
Are you involved in development of ProDOS and AppleWorks, and would you like to tell something about that?
Sure. I had written the initial basic, an integer basic. Now, I originally laid out my my syntax chart to include floating point, the entire definition of the basic language, and then I thought, boy, nobody has a basic for the 6502. I've got to be the first one. I can probably save 1 month if I leave out the floating point. So I shrunk my syntax tables down a little, and the syntax tables are actually stored in memory. The way I implemented it, I have no idea if anybody else writes compilers that way. But I took out the floating point, and I kind of was a number purist, and I kind of believe in that. Even our Hewlett Packard calculators were doing floating point calculations, but they did it with integer. They did it with integer methods all the way for accuracy, more than methods that gave accuracy more than speed. But when you got to checkbook programs, it's harder for other humans to understand how do I handle dollars and cents. And they want a floating point solution, despite the fact that floating point is going to have the round off errors and everything else just as bad as if you did it all with integers for both parts. So we wanted a floating point basic. I started writing one. We moved into a separate office, and it was me, Randy Wigington, and I got John Drapery, Captain Crunch. And at that point in time, I think he'd been caught for phone phreaking, but he hadn't been put in jail yet. So not until his 3rd arrest. And I had him develop a phone board, because I got this idea, computers have to tie into electrical things in your house. One's a phone line. Well, everybody has modems. Don't do something that's been done. But why doesn't somebody have a phone that can dial, listen for busies, listen for the tone coming back, listen for ring signals, and can turn on and off answering machines. So basically an answering machine board, or a complete phone board, designed this great board with one little phase lock loop that could generate the tones, the touch tones, and listen for busy signals and all. The board worked great, and get it up to program 5,000 calls a night trying to crack some no codes he had. He was cracking 1 code a night. And I thought of modifying his program, so instead of dialing 800 numbers, it dialed 808 in Hawaii, he'd get a $20,000 bill. That was too big of a deal. I didn't want it to go. It was too big for me. I'd be too much trouble for that much. So I forget what I was answering now. Apple. So anyway, John Draper, myself, and Randy Wigington were down there. Randy and I were working on floating point basic. We started describing a syntax that we felt was good, and it was closer to the Hewlett-Packard basic that I had started with, than with some enhancements, than the digital equipment type basic that Bill Gates had used, and it had to do with mostly how you identified strings and substrings. But as I was working on it, Microsoft called us and basically said that they had a 6502 basic. Probably had bought it somewhere, that's their strategy. So they set it down, and Randy and I evaluated it. We went through it pretty completely, tested it, worked with Microsoft to get it working a little, because it had a couple of little things that needed doing for our computer. And we added a few features. We defined a few features to add for doing the color stuff. And then that just saved us the time of doing it, so it was a shortcut. So we got their basic, and I guess it was badly negotiated because something like 5 years later, to keep that basic, I forget what it was we had to give up. Something
Mac basic.
It was Macintosh, no, the feel and use basically of the Macintosh. I think we had to license a way to keep that Apple II basic going.
I think it's Mac Basic. They wanted to do Mac Basic, Apple did, and then Microsoft said, no, we can't do it.
Right, they said, no, yeah, can't do, I remember that, can't do Mac Basic if you want to keep the Apple II Basic. We had to have the Apple II Basic, that was our big money, our profit of the whole company. That's really what got us to here today. The company valuation was probably bigger back then than it is now. So the floating point basic got resolved that way. ProDOS started up in conjunction with the Apple III development team. We hired a few good, smart operating systems type people. I was never an operating systems person. I started working for the DOS on the Apple II. I did low-level code that works the floppy disk drive. I did fine. But we went over to a consulting group and had them spec out and design the operating system.
That was Apple DOS.
That was Apple DOS, yeah. And then to move to ProDOS, we hired these people that kind of knew about operating systems, bright people from colleges, and quite a few of them, for some reason, the whole team wound up typing in Dvorak, which I kind of thought was sort of worthless, but now I type in Dvorak, so I could sort of see where they were coming from, purist types. And they came up with ProDOS, and I was just disappointed that you still didn't have the disk commands right in the language. It's kind of missing that, but I wasn't close enough to that project. I was off on other hardware projects, so I didn't try to run around everywhere and have a stab into every project going on. Let good people do their work.
ProDOS was about the same time as developing SOS for the Apple III.
Yes, SOS for the Apple III kind of led into ProDOS. I'm sorry. It kind of went back. It was a backward step. Yeah, SOS and then ProDOS.
Looked in the original beta drafts of the SOS reference manual. The user file types is a back. This is ProDOS for 2 years before ProDOS came out.
Yeah, we had the name ProDOS inside so early. It's hard to, the two were so interrelated. Yeah, it's hard. Hard for me to go back. I wasn't really in that group either. But
and then AppleWorks is on the Apple III. It's 3 pieces, but it's sold separately.
Hold on, I'm going to ask you the questions. This is the wrong guy. Get out of here.
Apple published AppleWorks for the Apple II, but the Apple III was sold by Havas Systems. Were they the same product when they started?
Repeat that question.
But AppleWorks came out. The 2E and ProDOS introduction and everything, all kind of intertwined. And then there was 3 pieces on the Apple III. Did they start out as the same product?
My recollection is they did not start out as the same product, but my memory's not too good going back that far. I've had a lot of intervening things, and I don't know remember these kind of things as well as you guys are remembering them. Any more questions? Or
what's the last Apple II product you worked on?
The last Apple II product I worked on? Yeah. Well, it was actually, I was in the Apple IIX and Apple II GS group. I had basically taken time off to go get my college degree, put on some concerts, and came back to Apple in that group. And that would have been it.
You involved with GSOS?
Only on the sidelines. Yeah, not directly. About that time, I was spending a lot of time going around speaking to computer groups and too much like variety. I mean, every phone call rang at my desk because I just believed your phone should ring, you shouldn't be inaccessible. Let me do that because I'm around. If not, anybody can talk.
Hey Max, nice to see you. I know you're on the list. How much did we got one? Yeah, we have to take it back in about 3 hours. Yeah, that's last year.
I've already had right.
Yeah, he was over at the dorm briefly.
So you just know that it fails by
I just found out about it this morning.
I think it was planned for.
It's supposed to be.
Well, what the deal is, he's got like a 5 o'clock flight. He got a good portion of it. Tony's got So what were you doing?
She brought up. That'd be my guess. We usually do it.
It's not ours.
I was there last
Probably around our people out.
I got
Hey Richard, forward to see you. Welcome to this side of No, I just got here 20 minutes ago. I've got to be really good to hear it. That also means that you can't crush it. What did you get from the stage?
Automated return machines crush them.
Quite non-stop, straight through the LAX cubes of aluminum. Okay. How long are you going to be here on this side?
My knees have been killing. I don't know what it is today. My knees are killing me.
Oh, okay.
Richard, Steve Wozniak.
How you doing?
Nice to meet you in person. I guess I'll be asking you questions later.
Yeah, I will do it.
Yeah, I think it's on Friday before the roast. It's the last thing before the roast.
Before we get to that.
Well, looking back, I'm indexing GenieLamp A2 Pro now, and I'm seeing messages from you back there in '93. So I'm thinking, well, I know the guy's been doing stuff for at least 10 years. So I figure you got stories.
Yeah.
Well, nice to meet you. Where exactly? I remember where Perth is. I think it's on the west coast, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Melbourne is sort of south or something.
Yeah, sort of like Perth, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Darwin.
When I was in high school in the 70s, early 70s.
If somebody can find an uncontaminated pair of tongs for the
Oh, you can just roll those.
yeah, but they're hard to get off the grill.
There's
back from the gathering.
all right.
Gatherers back from the hunt.
I go.
So some of those okay, just so you guys know.
Yeah.
Well, they never had that check off. They were going to cash over it. They said,
We could go up to 8,000 meters.
And off in there, it was like
nah, most certainly not.
He was cold anyway.
I visited my grandmother over to the Pine, Oregon, right near that. Yeah, it's hard to say. Little hot plains. Stuff in the high desert in Oregon.
Yeah,
Man,
For example, they make some of the work tan looking at.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Or they were listed in many easy ways to find solutions. There were so many hidden things. Who's going to find anything very hard to find some of the answers. Then there's things like you don't need to add a field to the database, I guess, in the analytic, and then you want to delete that field. We never used
The shy, retiring side.
Yeah, I can tell.
So I left him alone.
9 first. The 9 came out, it dialed 1, followed by the 9. So I complained to Steve, and he said, okay, we're going to fix it. So they fixed it, and unfortunately in the fix, they took out answering phone calls or something that I used and wanted more. So I lost.
You know that script?
I didn't use free or
Used.
$2.
In remote access?
Hard mode.
Scripts, those things. I was talking with Binky Melnick one time, and we were on CompuServe, and somebody was saying something about the script they were using, and she looked at it, oh my God, that stuff we cobbled together 10 years ago just for a hack. And it's still used exactly the same way.
Well, that doesn't mean it's bad, but a lot of the PowerBook scripts would work so much worse than even the towers would dial. The modems and the PowerBooks were very flaky, the recent ones. And,
The PowerBook modems
Ross
were
Bartman wrote a lot of good scripts. That you can go to his website and get better scripts down.
Used to drag around a US Robotics external courier readout everything inside the PowerBook bag because the modem inside was so bad. For that reason.
A lot of the PowerBook modems were just atrociously bad. Friends with Vios would work fine, and the towers would even work.
Everything's the best modem in the world.
Flight's at 5:55, so I want to get out of here about 3 to 4. I'd like to be early. Yeah, late. Yeah, 3 might be early, but I don't mind being early. Okay, more to sign. Can I actually sign one of these?
That's what I'm curious.
Yeah. These Sharpies are really
I've
great.
got one that's signed in Tokyo.
Boy, these are
signed
real,
with the original author as
what
well.
memories.
Will that rub off eventually, or?
All familiar with it.
Somewhere.
Not after it's in Facebook.
Sign the map? Yeah. Sign this here. All right.
That's our flight chart for coming in. Tony's far. There's
You've seen his website. It
Oh.
was Apple II Airlines.
No.
No, that's the that was when we got here. That's coming into the external chart.
Oh, yeah. You flew in?
Oh, I'm sorry.
172. You with us.
Where do you want to sign? Any particular place? Actually,
Here, Woz. Go ahead. Since they're getting the name tags out.
I got a short signature, so it's actually.
I know, it's, yeah.
The funny thing is, the name Woz. I started going to that nickname. They started calling me that at Hewlett Packard around the same times I was working on the Apple stuff. So the name Steve was kind of like pre-Apple, and then Woz goes along with Apple. And I treat them both equally now. Either name is the same.
It's already signed.
The inside, okay. Black, okay.
Yeah, black will work.
That way.
No, but that's where all the rest of them are
Is that going to stay on?
There you go.
That way it won't wear off, right?
Well, that's one he uses. He doesn't need a signature on the
I
outside.
got one T-shirt.
Oh, that's a fake one. I can tell. That's not.
I didn't sign that one, no.
That's what screen printed on there?
Well, this is one of the 50,000 versus like, I think there was.
I'm not convinced it was 50,000. I think
I had a friend buying one of my cars or something. I had to write a check for some work on a car. A friend's brother, Randy Wigginton's brother, actually.
That's actually yours.
And
105 divided by 8.
Oh, that's my name tag.
Go ahead, son, it was.
I'll use it for ID at the airport.
There you go. It's not government issued.
So I was had to pay this guy $5,000, and he didn't like that. He was getting a cash, a check, and not a cashier's check, and I didn't know how to get a cashier's check. And he was come up from Los Angeles, so I signed it Mickey Mouse. He didn't know until he got home. So he was livid.
Reminds me of the Rocky story.
There we go. I'll stick a DVD in my Apple at night and watch it.
Well, this would be already the speed up mission. Easter
$2 bill and give you the money for it if they can see two serial numbers. So that's the only rule.
You have to be able to see both of them.
You can cut the face out. You have not defaced it.
That's right.
Now, on the $2 bills, I loved it. Loved the people, hey, you got $3, and they start going in the pocket, and my friend and I both kind of corral them like we're blocking the view of other people. And then we pull out real secretly the $2 and rip off a couple for them. They'll give you $4 for 3. And then I'm going into they meet the specs of the U.S. government, therefore they are legal tender, and they cost us $3 each, which is true. They cost $3 each, and boy, these guys almost always are for right. I'd love to say, I'm not sure if the president's for right or not. The serial number's the same. The serial number does look the same.
People naturally look at the beginning and the end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, the other night I was out with
You're just an instigator,
two of the founders of the Danger Corporation, including Andy Rubin, the CEO. And I said to him, well, you'd think the serial numbers would be different. That's all I said. And they looked at them and they said, oh my God, these two really bright guys said they are the same. But I said, and I'm insisting these are legal tender.
Yeah, they are.
One digit. On the sheet, they come like this where they're...
How do you get them with the you can buy okay, when I bought these, you could only buy 1s and 2s on sheets then. Then they added 5s, now they've added 10s and 20s. You can buy sheets of 4, sheets of 16, or sheets of 32 bills.
How do you get it perforated?
And the bigger sheets I love to cut like a bill and a third of a bill. A little part of a bill, not quite over the serial number. A little bit of it because it looks like a horrible misprint or something's wrong. Or I cut them out of place or at a little angle, or a little small or a little big.
I know where those have been coming from.
Leave them as tips is safe.
Where do you get them perforated?
A friend of mine knew a printer somewhere, Santa Cruz, I think, but I'm not positive. The printer just took them and gummed them. And
oh, you get them in the sheets and then have them perforated after?
Yes, and the first batches, I have many of these pads. The first batches I did, the perforations weren't tearing well, so this time you perforate heavier and it works better.
And is that like a laser cut?
I have no idea, because I didn't get close to the printer. They went out of me and they came back, and tons of them, and they're only $2 bills. How much does it cost for fun?
You're paying $3 for $2, plus you're paying for the perforation.
We also have them on cardboard back pads, like a pad of paper. Yeah. Kind of usually we pull them out of a coat to start using them to spend. And just when people are getting suspicious, saying, "Yeah, the serial number's the same," that's when we say, "Got to take our food and go. Keep the change." One time was really funny. I was at a basketball game again last year, and we went up to one of these little ice cream, whatever you call those little ball things, whatever you call those guys. And my friend was buying one of those, and she looks at the bill of 2, so let's check them. The manager comes over, okay, guy with a walkie-talkie, security type guy, and he pulls out one of the pens to check the bill, and I said, "Oh no, you're not authorized to check the bills. You're not authorized to test them with the pen." And this guy was so meek. I mean, he was a whimper. Puts his pen back, and he doesn't do it. Like, how can a customer tell you what you can and can't do? But I acted real authoritative.
Oh yeah,
and at the very worst, I would have said, "Then I'll take them back."
A lot of times, if you tell people that you're in charge, they'll let you.
Now, one good prank I played at this last year's basketball games, and I have years and years of doing similar ones, is, okay, we're driving there with a high school teacher that I know very well. She's renting my house now with her high school teacher friend that she just married, and a student of hers who was into the basketball and the Warriors, a high school student, and I'd never met him, but he's never been to a game. Jeremy's his name. We're driving to the game, and Jim and I have pulled this prank many, many times. We go, Jim, you know, I think we're going to, if we get off on Hagenberger, we're going to be stuck in a mess of traffic. We might be late. We got to try to get into the employees lot. Okay? Well, I have a little coupon that gets me into the closer parking area. It's a little W coupon I show the guard and I get in. But the other people in the back of the car don't know it. Jeremy doesn't know it. So we said, well, what are we going to say? Who looks like a player? And we look around and said, no, none of us are going to pass as a player. Maybe, we finally came up with the national anthem singer. We're here with singing the national anthem. Okay, all right. So Jeremy, we're going to tell him you're singing the national anthem. Now we pull up to the guard and I show him my coupon, so we're covered that way. And Jeremy doesn't know that I have a coupon. And then we're talking to the guard and we say, we got the guy who's going to sing the national anthem here. He says, what's his name? You know, he's got this clipboard, and we sort of, Jeremy speaks up his name. I was going to dodge it somehow. Jeremy says his name. He says, not on my list, you know. We said, well, go ahead, Jeremy. We said, sing him a This guy that can't sing, he goes, oh, say, can you see? And, and he thought that he sung his way in, okay? So we get into the lot, we get into the parking lot that we have a pass for, and then we made up a story that we were balloon blowers to get in the next turnstile. But we really, our tickets get us in anyway. I thought we were going in a special entrance. And then we're not done. Jim and I have done this before. We know this. We get to meet the security people and the ushers by using $2 bills. They get to know us really well, and we're friendly with them. And we get such privilege. I even rode my Segway into games this year and got the mascot of the Warriors to ride it. They were going to let me ride it on the court before a game with him, but I didn't make it before the national anthem. But anyway, we're there with Jeremy. We're sitting in our seats. We've talked our way in. We pulled this one off. He's having a good old time, and we got our uniformed, walkie-talkie, security guard friend to come up to our seats, lean over to Jeremy and say, okay, it's time to come down to sing the anthem. He actually got him, and so the protesting got him down about 3 steps before we finally said, look, his throat's a little sore today. Maybe you can find your backup singer. He's a little shaky. He said he was going to write a journal. He was never going to forget that day. But we finally told him how we'd set it up.
Hey, just remember, paybacks from hell.
The ejector. Because if that gets laid on its side, it gets compressed in.
Huh. They had the market dominance.
Yeah,
that's a question.
That's hard to say.
There's so many. Yeah, I know everybody's getting their GS ones.
Thank you.
Boy, a lot of people brought them. Well, I guess everybody has to bring them to KansasFest.
Absolutely.
A lot of times
I brought mine, didn't bring a keyboard.
A lot of times it's a meeting of Mac owners.
Figured I was going to use voice input.
Apple II simulators. We've got backward compatibility so that you could run Apple II programs on the next. It was just the technology was so different.
A, it wasn't feasible, and B, to come up with that kind of style of machine.
Yeah.
A, you needed a whole different processor to accomplish as much, and the emulation would have been not worth it probably. But it's not the way Steve Jobs works anyway.
Yeah.
It's just everything's kind of a new, well-defined closed machine on its own anyway.
So the judgment would be as feasible just to own Apple II.
Just do not tiny screen that it doesn't have any needs. See, so you're making too many cutbacks to the Apple II software wouldn't even work. You don't even have color. So there's too many things that wouldn't make sense. That's why I say it's not feasible.
It would be as feasible to own 2 separate machines. And have file compatibility, which they did have, right?
I'm trying to remember how if there was file.
It took a long time. There was, I remember in college in like 89, 91, they had all of these. You could get at your Protos files from a Mac, but you had to.
Apple File Exchange.
Yeah, Apple File Exchange. You had to run you had to get them onto the 3.5, and you had to get into the Macintosh.
Either that or Apple Talk.
Yeah, and then every so often it'd get stuck in there, and the Mac would insist that it ejected the disk already, and I had to use a straightened out paper clip to pop the disk out.
The floppy instead of actually reading the bloody thing.
Yeah, it took them years to get it working properly, but it did eventually work. And then eventually they got it working so you could just stick the disk skin, and the Mac OS would recognize it.
Yeah, right after they got
Yeah, eventually when we had the GS and the HFS translator, it was just easier to make an HFS disk on your Apple II and just take that to a Macintosh.
There was a limited period because up to some time there was no translation of Apple II files. In the beginning of a certain release of Mac OS, I guess, there was translation, AFE, Apple file. Then, after Apple was a PC exchange, it no longer was available again, right? They must have decided Apple II was too far out of date.
Or that you could just run the old program, which sounded
We always do have to put a lot of effort into keeping some compatibility with the PC format.
Yeah.
Oh, well, these days you have to be compatible with Office.
Yeah.
That's what I find amusing is that the antitrust monopolies against Microsoft in other countries are not about Windows. They're about Microsoft Office. Because it's the applications that is how they get you now. I'm really sick of people continuing to insist on sending me attachments, even though they know I do not run Windows at home.
Yes, but Scott McNeely did make some points about that, at least if not in the Microsoft lawsuit at the same time as it, having to do with the little nuances and artifacts that are built into a program like Office that you can't duplicate exactly, and they can control the little special weird behaviors version by version to basically make you, very slight effort to make you incompatible.
Oh yeah.
There's also non-spec characteristics. There's also, they know which spec characteristics are serious and which they might change.
Yeah, it's almost sort of sad.
Is reverse engineering being outlawed now? I noticed that you even look at agreements just for someone who's an outsider, non-professional like me. You look at the agreements you have to read, before you download, and reverse engineering in every form of it is mentioned.
Yeah,
Come on,
it's a compact. It doesn't have the Asian logo on it.
Blue green. Sign it in blue green. Sign it in silver.
Whatever you want.
That was
in green in a different color. That's funny.
I should have used red.
Serves you right, Bruce.
I just want to see what he do. That's my idea of a practical joke.
My brother worked at Compaq.
I think that one's a bit much.
That's a good machine.
I didn't even want to hand it to you.
Nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I wanted to get a chance to show you my C1 board before you go.
You should bring it down.
Sorry. Where you headed one board? Just to reconfigure both.
They're liars. Every one of them. Or delusion.
Sounds too
Well, I think delusion. I don't think it's actually accurate to call them.
Sure, I'm going to be around a little bit, just meandering for a while.
Sure. Let's go ahead and
Stand
over there, but
so much
I guess I'll get you.
Don't give away the pen.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Actually, better if I keep the pen, maybe.
Maybe Bill could take a picture of us with your autograph.
Hold on a second.
Sure. Yeah, you got to get it right.
Oh my God. Steve Wozniak. Who's that?
I understand. That's why
All right.
You sure the cup wasn't in the
Our
picture?
next generation of innovation.
You had it right, move the foot ahead. Okay.
I get hundreds of emails a day, actually.
Carl, take it into the airport.
Clear up.
Actually, it's sort of, it's almost a misnomer because psychology, the way we study memory, short-term memory is what we're having just for a few seconds. And
That was how I covered up the...
That's the 2X. And now what's this one?
I know this.
Yeah.
Use this one.
This is looking like a very, very prototype.
It looks like it too.
Yeah, but we made a few in the company on these boards first, a certain number, like under 10 or 10 or something, and those were the early ROMs. Boy, those ROMs were a big deal to be the first company to use the 2K ROMs. The first. Yeah, that was a big deal. Well, IBM might have some internal, but we used the first. That's how you got that.
I left my water.
Oh, here you go. Maybe take it out of there.
Gotta have a little drink because my Yeah, I'll sign the outside.
Boy, then we can split any name in there.
Right there, Gab.
I'm sorry. I would always tell you. I wouldn't play a trick on you. I still Alan and Michael Baum. I see all the time. Just like
When he was
every
emptying out the old house to move to the new one down the street.
Yeah.
I went up there and got a bunch of stuff. And he brought that out, and he says it's probably the only one. And then when I fired it up, it actually works that way.
Oh, geez.
It's reseeded a bunch of stuff. It actually works.
What is that?
So it's got the coprocessor card was supposed to sit in front, the memory expansion. It's got 128 on it. Two serial ports are in here. 2 serial cards are here, and the mouse connector.
Is this a 2X?
So it's basically it says Golden Gate when you turn it on.
Golden Gate, yeah.
Wow.
Merlin?
That was one of them, yeah.
So it's got the PC.
Sounds familiar.
No, the guy who did it, though, Merlin Assembly.
Robert Wagner.
Roger Wagner?
Roger Wagner.
No,
that's Glenn Breed.
Yeah, I know Merlin from
All Apple.
Yeah, I use this for IP and DMA and all kinds of stuff.
So this is basically a whole computer.
Yeah, use 6580. It uses modern peripherals on it instead of regular and then floppy controller and stuff. Do it all in hardware. Compact flash for mass storage.
Now, does this do an Apple II or some other computer?
It does C64 right now.
64.
Yeah. If I'm gonna do an Apple II for it.
Man.
It was my choice of USB
Where did you pick up these skills?
I'm self-taught.
Self-taught?
Yeah.
Did you go to college and make boards there?
No.
Oh, that's cool.
Just fanatic from the early days, I guess.
That's where the best stuff comes from. Oh my gosh. I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah.
Okay, one
Yes,
last
it
one
was
here,
me listening
Steve.
to your story because it's like, oh yeah, I've been there.
Is that something worthwhile? And you college and make boards there?
No.
Oh, that's cool.
Just fanatic from the early days, I guess.
That's where the best stuff comes from. Oh my gosh. I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah.
Okay, one last
Yes,
one
it was
here,
me listening
Steve.
to your story because it's like, oh yeah, I've been there.
Is that something worthwhile? And you did it yourself.
He's got to get
Some of the stuff nowadays with surface mount, I mean, it's like you can't really do it yourself or
Oh yeah.
afford to.
Well, this one was machine assembled. I had 300 boards made.
See if he puts his shirts on too.
Oh yeah.
So all
Right there or right down here?
Oh,
I think it looks great here.
The actual camera.
Hope you can make it next
Come out to Alliance sometime. Have you been to Carhenge yet?
No.
I thought you tried
Out in
this.
western Nebraska?
No, never been in Nebraska.
You need to come out to Carhenge and check it out sometime.
Carhenge.
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I like that. That's a place I would go to. I like to go to interesting places.
Hang
When
on
I
a
get my
second.
car trip out to KansasFest.
Yeah?
Wait a minute, I didn't have time to take my car trip this year. Next year.
Why is K-Fest always in Missouri? That's what I'd like to know.
He's from Nebraska. He doesn't
What state are
understand
we in?
Missouri.
Get in there. Just want to say, hey, thanks a lot for coming out. Really appreciate
Okay,
it.
nice meeting
It's
you.
been wonderful.
Yeah.
It's been really inspirational, and it's just,
I forgot where you came from.
Columbus, Ohio. Nobody knows.
What? Nobody does? Columbus, Ohio. Home. One of my best friends in high school went to a college there. Ohio Wesleyan.
Ohio Wesleyan. My girlfriend
Yes.
goes there. So.
Yeah, nice little small liberal arts
What
college.
was the name?
His name was Doug Pedersen. Long ago.
Okay. We got a few more up there.
Well, there you kind of have it. That is the Friday night programming block for KansasFest 2025. That was kind of fun. Peter, did you not pay the power bill? What happened?
He's ready for bed.
Oh no.
It's night here.
Well, it's night here too.
I swear I'll turn the light on tomorrow.
Fair enough. Oh gosh. Well, we got an early start tomorrow. We wrapping this up?
Yep, that was great. Thanks, Ron, for shepherding all of this and
Oh yeah,
wrangling
absolutely.
this. So,
Hey, the 34 people that are still out there watching, thank you so much for joining us this evening. This was a lot of fun. Thank you to all the people that were hanging out in Discord with all the great conversation and just the weird stories and people just picking people out. They'd be like, "Oh, wait a minute! Holy crap, that was so and so," and all that. And thanks for our special guests that stopped by this evening. It was a lot of fun.
all right, see you tomorrow morning.
All right.
Have a good night. Thanks again. Thanks, Ron.